Hello guys, welcome to Pika Fiction. So in this video, we will see what if Ash caught the all-legendary god Pokemon. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1, The weight of 1,000 plates. The air in Celestic Town had always been thin and sharp, tasting of mountain stone and ancient memory. For Cynthia, the Sinnoh champion, it was the smell of home, a fragrance of history she had spent her life trying to decipher. Today, however, the air tasted of nothing at all. It was a profound and unsettling absence of sensation. Her boots crunched on the gravel path leading toward the town's central shrine, the sound unnervingly sharp in the sudden stillness. The usual chorus of Starly and the distant bleating of a farmer's wooloo were gone, replaced by a low, subaudible hum that vibrated in her teeth. It was the sound of a television tuned to a dead channel, stretched across the entire valley. "Status, Garchomp," she said, her voice low. She didn't look back, her gaze fixed on the shimmering distortion hanging in the air 100 yards ahead, poised directly over the shrine's entrance. Beside her, the hulking shape of her partner shifted its weight, the scythe-like fins on its arms tensing. The land shark Pokemon let out a low growl, a rumble of disturbed earth. It, too, felt the wrongness. Its yellow eyes, usually burning with a predator's confidence, were narrowed with a primal uncertainty she had rarely seen. "I know," Cynthia murmured, adjusting the sensor array clipped to her belt. The device, a prototype from Professor Rowan's lab, was supposed to measure spatial energy signatures. Right now, its needle was frantically jittering against the far right peg, useless. Whatever that is, it's not playing by the rules. The distortion looked like heat haze over an asphalt road, but it gave off no warmth. Instead, a palpable cold bled from it, leaching the color from its surroundings. The vibrant green of the grass faded to a sickly gray-green near its edge. The deep blue of the sky, seen through its wavering form, was a washed-out, lifeless blue. It was as if a patch of the world had been left out in the sun too long, its very essence bleached away. She had been tracking these phenomena for 3 weeks. They were appearing globally, but the ones in Sinnoh felt personal. A temporal stutter near Orberg Gate that aged a patch of forest by a century in seconds. A gravitational anomaly over Lake Acuity that had briefly caused the water to bulge upwards in a silent, glassy dome. But this was different. The others were chaotic acts of physics. This felt like a deliberate erasure. "Hold here," she commanded softly. Garchomp let out another uneasy grumble but obeyed, its body a coiled spring of power. Cynthia took a few cautious steps forward, her long black coat swirling around her ankles. She raised a hand, palm out, as if she could feel the texture of the air. 10 feet from the edge of the shimmer, she felt it. A cold, static prickle across her skin, the kind you feel just before a lightning strike. The hum intensified, no longer just in her teeth but in the core of her bones. It was a vibration of pure negation. She had an irrational, terrifying thought: this is what the world sounds like when it stops screaming. Her gaze was drawn to the center of the distortion. Within the shimmering warp, the world wasn't just distorted, it was gone. It was not blackness, for black is a color. It was not a void, for a void is an empty space. This was a hole in space. An uncolor. A patch of pure, unadulterated nothing that the universe was desperately trying to paper over with warped light and physics. Her archaeologist's mind, a library of myths and legends, screamed a single, forgotten word at her. Nihilus. The great unraveling. The echo of what came before creation. She'd always dismissed it as a pre-creationist myth, a philosophical concept, not a literal entity. A story told to frighten children before the tale of the original one was even conceived. The hum spiked. The hole in reality widened by a foot, then 2. The grass at the edge of the distortion didn't die, it ceased to exist, turning from faded gray to absolute nothing in an instant. The stone of the shrine path followed, flaking away into non-being like sand in the wind. Garchomp, pull back, she snapped, stumbling backward, her scholarly calm shattering into a spike of pure survival instinct. But the nothingness was faster. It lunged, not like a creature, but like a spill of acid, pouring across the ground toward her. Garchomp roared, a sound of fury and fear, and moved. It wasn't a blur of motion, it was simply there, planting its feet between Cynthia and the encroaching void. Its fin blades glowed with a faint blue light. "No, don't," she cried, but it was too late. Garchomp thrust its arm forward, unleashing a dragon claw. The trio of energy blades, sharp enough to cleave steel, shot into the distortion. They did not explode. They did not impact. They simply vanished, their light and energy consumed without a ripple, without a sound. Garchomp recoiled, shaking its head as if it couldn't believe what its senses were telling it. The void didn't care. It surged forward, touching the tip of Garchomp's foot. There was no sound, no flash of light. The sharpened claw on Garchomp's toe just ended. Not severed. The line between what was and what wasn't was so clean, so absolute, it broke the laws of physics. Garchomp shrieked, a high, piercing sound of pain and utter confusion, scrambling back on its haunches. The void advanced, hungry. Cynthia's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. This was how it ended. Not in some grand battle, but erased by a creeping patch of ontological decay. She fumbled for a poke ball at her belt, her fingers numb, her mind screaming. Then, reality tore open. It happened with a sound that was the opposite of the void's silence, a deafening, dimensional shriek, like a diamond stylus being dragged across the fabric of spacetime. A gash of brilliant, pearlescent pink light split the air above the shrine. From it, a creature of impossible geometry and divine rage emerged. Palkia. The god of space was magnificent and terrible. Its roar was a physical wave of force that kicked up dust and flattened the grass for 100 yards, a roar that defined and asserted its own existence. But it was wounded. Deep, corrosive-looking marks, like acid burns, marred its normally pristine white hide. One of the great pearls on its shoulders was cracked, leaking a faint, shimmering light that dissipated into the air. It ignored Cynthia completely, its furious, glowing red eyes fixed on the patch of nothingness. With another guttural roar, Palkia's body flared with pink energy. It swiped a clawed hand through the air, and a blade of spatial energy, a spatial rend, materialized. It was a cut in the world itself, a distortion that folded space in upon itself. When the spatial rend hit the void, there was no explosion. The two opposing forces met, and the universe screamed. The air buckled. For a horrifying second, Cynthia saw the world from 3 different angles at once. The shrine, the mountain, her own hand, they fractured into a cubist nightmare. Palkia roared again, this time in pain. Its attack had held the void back, but at a cost. The nothingness seemed to feed on the energy, the edges of it boiling where the spatial rend had struck. It was like trying to douse a fire with gasoline. The void pulsed, and then lashed out. Not with a claw or a beam, but with its very nature. It projected a wave of absence. Palkia staggered in the air, a leg and a portion of its tail flickering, threatening to dissolve into the same non-existence that had claimed Garchomp's claw. It was losing. The god of space was being unmade. With a final, desperate cry, Palkia seemed to make a decision. Its eyes glowed, and it abandoned its attack on the void. It swooped down, the air displacing around it. Cynthia had a brief, terrifying impression of a colossal pink and white form descending upon her. She braced for impact, but there was none. Palkia's claw, impossibly gentle, curled around her. Space twisted, compressed, and folded. The sight of the celestic valley, the terrifying uncolor of the void, her trembling Garchomp, it all dissolved into a nauseating, kaleidoscopic tunnel of light and color. And then it was gone. The tree of beginning was a sanctuary of life, pulsing with a gentle, rhythmic energy that resonated in the soul. Ash Ketchum, the reigning world monarch, sat cross-legged on a crystalline outcrop near its heart. His eyes were closed, his breathing slow and even. The frantic energy of his youth had not vanished but had been tempered, forged by 1,000 battles into a core of unshakable calm. At 22, the fire still burned in him, but now it was a controlled, efficient furnace, not a wildfire. On his shoulder, Pikachu's ears twitched, perfectly in sync with his partner's breathing. The little mouse Pokémon was more than a friend, he was an extension of Ash's own spirit, an anchor of familiarity in a world that had grown increasingly complex. Here, in the heart of the world, they were at peace. The weight of the monarch title, the endless challenges, the political maneuvering he despised, it all melted away, leaving only the simple connection between a trainer and his first Pokémon. Ash was listening. Not with his ears, but with his entire being. He was listening to the thrum of the tree, the faint, joyful chirps of the Mew that called it home, the collective life force of the countless Pokémon that lived within its crystalline branches. It was a symphony of existence, and for a moment, he was a part of it. Then, a sour note. It was faint at first, a tiny flicker of dissonance in the grand orchestra. Ash's brow furrowed. He opened his eyes, his gaze sharp and focused. Pikachu. Pika. Pikachu's head tilted, his own senses probing the environment. His cheeks sparked with a faint, worried static. The flicker came again, stronger this time. A wave of something cold and hollow that washed through the tree's vibrant aura, making it stutter like a dying light bulb. The gentle, rhythmic pulse of the great crystal heart faltered for a beat. A frantic, high-pitched cry echoed through the cavern. Not a sound, but a psychic projection, laced with a terror that was utterly alien to the creature producing it. Mew, the playful progenitor, materialized in front of Ash, its blue eyes wide with panic. It wasn't teasing or curious. It was mortally afraid. Wrong. Wrong. It's wrong. The song is breaking, its voice shrieked in his mind. Ash was on his feet in an instant, his calm evaporating into pure, honed instinct. What is it, Mew? What's wrong? Mew zipped around him in a frantic circle, its long tail whipping through the air. It gestured wildly toward the shimmering, crystalline trunk of the tree. The light. It's fading. It's going out. Ash placed a hand on the tree's surface. It was usually warm, humming with a powerful, living energy. Now, it felt cool. Sluggish. The life flowing through it was being stifled, choked by an unseen force. He could feel it now, a creeping cold that had nothing to do with temperature. It was the cold of a deep cellar, of a forgotten tomb. The cold of absence. All around the world, in the deepest oceans, in the highest stratosphere, in the hidden corners of the earth, other beings felt it too. Kyogre's primal dream song developed a note of frantic dissonance. Groudon shifted restlessly in its magma chamber, a deep, instinctual fear warring with its territorial rage. From its lonely vigil in the ozone layer, Rayquaza let out a hiss of agitation, its serpentine body twisting as it scanned the world for a foe it could not see. The Guardians, the Creators, the Dreamers, they were all stirring, a collective chorus of divine panic rising against a silent, encroaching dread. It was into this rising tide of fear that Palkia ripped its way into existence. One moment, Ash, Pikachu, and a terrified Mew were alone in the heart of the tree. The next, a jagged wound of pink light tore open the air 20 feet away, and the god of space stumbled out, collapsing onto the crystalline floor with a ground-shaking thud. In its gently unfurling claw was a pale, disheveled Cynthia. Cynthia! Ash shouted, rushing forward as she stumbled free, her face ashen. Ash, she gasped, leaning against Palkia's flank for support, her eyes wide with shock. The shrine, it's gone. It just erased it. Ash's eyes moved from her to the wounded deity. The acrid smell of ozone and something else, something metallic and wrong, hung in the air around Palkia. Its breathing was labored, each exhalation a pained wheeze. Its powerful form was trembling. Palkia's red eyes found Ash. Its voice, a cataclysm of sound and thought, echoed directly in his mind. It was not a conversation, it was a desperate databurst of raw terror. Images, sounds, feelings flooded Ash's consciousness. A silent, colorless void. A dragon's roar of defiance being swallowed by silence. The fabric of reality tearing like wet paper. And a single, unifying concept, a feeling of being unmade. Spear pillar, Palkia projected, the thought laced with agony. He is there. Time itself, is breaking. It is unmaking, everything. Ash didn't need any more explanation. The cold he felt in the tree, Mew's terror, Cynthia's appearance, the wounded state of a god, it all pointed to one place. The Alpha and Omega of Sinnoh. The stage of creation. He turned to Cynthia, his face grim, his decision already made. I need to get there. He looked up at the ceiling of the vast cavern. Latios. A moment later, a sleek, blue and white form materialized from a shimmer of light, its golden eyes filled with concern. Latios let out a soft cry, sensing the gravity of the situation. Stay here with her, Ash said to Mew, his voice leaving no room for argument. Keep the tree safe for as long as you can. He then looked at Cynthia. Are you coming? She didn't hesitate. Her fear was a tangible thing, but the scholar in her, the champion in her, was stronger. She pushed herself off Palkia and gave a sharp, determined nod. Try and stop me. Ash helped her onto Latios's back, swinging up to sit in front of her. Pikachu scrambled into his customary position on his shoulder, his body tense, cheeks crackling with contained power. Spear pillar, Ash said, his voice low. As fast as you can. Latios let out a sharp cry of assent. It tucked its jet-like wings, and with a psychic boom that vibrated the very crystals of the cavern, they shot upwards, a blue and white missile rocketing toward a battle at the dawn of time. As they flew, a blur of color against the sky, Cynthia leaned forward, her voice barely audible over the roar of the wind. Ash, this isn't like Team Galactic. It's not a machine we can break. What I saw, it doesn't destroy. It erases. How do you fight something that's defined by what it isn't? Ash stared ahead, his jaw tight. The peak of Mount Coronet was visible now, a jagged tooth against the sky. But the sky above it was wrong. It wasn't blue, or gray, or black. It was fractured, webbed with hairline cracks that leaked a pale, sickly light. I don't know, he admitted, his voice a low growl of frustration. But Dialga and Palkia are. And they're losing. That's all that matters right now. The summit of Mount Coronet was a maelstrom of cosmic violence. Spear Pillar, the ancient stage where the universe was born, was now its potential deathbed. The sky was shattered. Cracks spiderwebbed across the heavens, leaking the raw, chaotic energy of the space between dimensions. The air itself was a battlefield, thick with the metallic tang of clashing temporal waves and the ozone shriek of rending space. At the center of it all, two gods fought a desperate, losing war. Dialga, its magnificent blue hide scarred with the same corrosive marks as Palkia's, roared a challenge. The diamond on its chest pulsed, unleashing a wave of temporal energy, a roar of time that distorted the very flow of moments. The attack, powerful enough to age a mountain to dust in an instant, washed over the creeping edge of the void. For a second, the nothingness seemed to flicker, its forward momentum slowing as billions of years were forced upon it. But it was only a second. The void, timeless and eternal, simply absorbed the energy, its tranquil surface barely rippling. Then it surged forward again, and the ground over which the roar of time had passed simply ceased to be. Palkia, having teleported itself to the battle moments after sending Ash away, shrieked its own defiance. It conjured a dozen spatial rifts, attempting to fold space around the void, to trap it in an impossible pocket dimension. The rifts swirled and collapsed, but the nothingness flowed through them, around them, unmaking the very fabric of Palkia's attack as it went. They were two artisans, a watchmaker and a cartographer, trying to fight a rust that consumed their tools, their materials, and the very concept of their craft. The void itself was a monstrous, beautiful thing. It had grown from the small patch in Celestic Town into a gaping maw of non-existence that dominated the northern quadrant of the sky, centered on the ruins of Spear Pillar. It made no sound, had no form, possessed no mind. It was a cancer of physics, a patch of the primal before that had somehow found its way into the now. It was upon this scene that Latios arrived, banking hard and depositing Ash and Cynthia on a relatively stable outcrop of rock a safe distance from the fray. The sheer scale of the conflict was breathtaking and horrifying. It was like watching two surgeons trying to perform a heart transplant on a patient while the patient's body was actively dissolving into mist. By the gods, Cynthia breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. The academic understanding of the myths was nothing compared to this raw, terrifying reality. Ash's eyes weren't on the void. They were on Dialga and Palkia. He could feel their struggle, not as a trainer watching a battle, but on a deeper, more primal level. He could feel their exhaustion, their desperation, their divine terror as the very concepts they embodied were being systematically unmade. The mandate he didn't yet know he was about to receive was already resonating with them, a faint, sympathetic hum in his soul. Pikachu's fur was standing on end, his body crackling with so much electricity that the air around him smelled of rain. "Pika, Chu," he whispered, his small voice filled with an awe that bordered on fear. The void pulsed, a silent exhalation of its being. A wave of negation, far stronger than the one that had staggered Palkia in Celestic Town, washed over the battlefield. Dialga faltered. The rhythmic, steady glow of its temporal fin sputtered. For a gut-wrenching moment, its form flickered, becoming transparent, its mighty roar thinning to a ghostly echo. Time itself was becoming undone. Palkia shrieked and tried to shield its counterpart, creating a barrier of hardened space. The barrier held for a heartbeat, then shattered like glass, the pieces not falling but dissolving into nothing. They were finished. The universe had seconds left. And then, the world fell silent. The roar of time, the shriek of space, the howl of the wind, all of it stopped. The light from the cracks in the sky froze in place. The advancing void halted its crawl. A profound, absolute stillness descended upon Spear Pillar, a stillness so total it was more deafening than the chaos it had replaced. A single point of golden light appeared in the sky directly above them. It did not explode or flash. It simply expanded, unfolding with the silent, inexorable grace of a blossoming flower. It was not a light that cast shadows, it was a light that was substance. From it, 1,000 arms of shimmering, ethereal energy unfurled, not of flesh, but of pure creation. They were the scaffolding upon which reality had been built. At the center of the light, a form descended. Majestic, serene, and radiating an authority so absolute it bent the laws of physics by its very presence. The golden ring around its midsection pulsed with the slow, steady heartbeat of the universe. Arceus had arrived. Cynthia fell to her knees, not out of weakness, but because the sheer presence of the original one was a weight too great to stand against. Ash remained standing, though his legs trembled. He felt like a single note trying to comprehend a symphony. Arceus did not look at the void. It did not look at its faltering children. Its gaze, ancient and all-encompassing, settled upon the 22-year-old human and the electric mouse on his shoulder. Its voice was not a sound. It was a concept, planted directly into the minds of every living thing on the mountain. For Cynthia, it was a cascade of ancient text and divine geometry. For Pikachu, a feeling of absolute authority and warmth. For Ash, it was a conversation. "You see the dilemma, Ash Ketchum," the voice was calm, a stark contrast to the apocalyptic scene frozen around them. "It is the echo of the silence I displaced. The memory of the void I filled with my will. To strike it with power is to feed it the energy it craves. To destroy is to affirm its purpose. It cannot be fought." Ash's mind reeled, trying to process the sheer magnitude of what was being said. He was having a conversation with God, while the end of the world was on pause. Then, what can we do, he managed to think, the thought feeling small and fragile. The universe was not born from a single strike, but from a single, unyielding thought, let there be light. It was an act of will, not of force. This unraveling cannot be defeated by the fist. It must be defied by the heart. It is an argument that must be won, not a battle. Arceus's gaze intensified. I am the source. I cannot be the anchor. The universe requires an arbiter, a mortal nexus, whose will is not to conquer, but to connect. A heart that does not seek dominion over life, but harmony with it. A soul that has bonded with the land, the sea, the sky, with time and space, with life and death, and has sought not to control them, but to understand them. A montage of images, not his own, but drawn from the universe's memory of him, flashed through Ash's mind. A boy weeping over a stone statue of his friend. A hand offered to a frightened Latios. A body thrown in the path of an attack meant for Mew. A respectful bow to the titans of Hoenn. A shared aura with a Lucario at the Tree of Beginning. For an age, I have watched, Arceus continued. You have journeyed. You have battled. You have triumphed. But your greatest strength has never been your power. It has been your conviction. Your unyielding belief in the bonds you share. That is the will that is needed now. The will to declare that life, in all its chaotic, beautiful imperfection, is worth preserving. The weight of the implication settled on Ash. This wasn't an explanation. This was a job offer. The burden will be immense. Their power will be yours to call upon, but their fears, their pain, their rage, that will be yours to bear as well. You will be a king with a crown of thorns, a god burdened by a mortal heart. The world of humans will fear you. They will see a tyrant where a protector stands. But you will be their only hope. Arceus asked the question. Not with words, but with a feeling, a pure concept of choice. The fate of everything, resting on a single, silent answer. Will you bear this weight, Ash Ketchum? Will you be the anchor for a world that may despise you for it? Will you be my arbiter? Ash looked at Pikachu, whose small paw was resting on his cheek, a silent show of absolute support. He looked at Cynthia, kneeling on the cold stone, her face a mixture of terror and awe. He looked at the wounded forms of Dialga and Palkia, two forces of nature brought to their knees. He looked at the silent, creeping nothingness that promised an end to all struggle, all pain, all joy. His answer was not born of arrogance or a thirst for power. It was the same simple, unwavering resolve that had driven him since he first left Pallet Town. A problem existed. His friends were in trouble. He had to help. I will, he projected back, his will a single, sharp point of light in the vastness of Arceus's consciousness. The effect was instantaneous. The golden light of Arceus intensified, and one of the 1,000 arms, a band of pure, incandescent energy, detached from its form. It flowed down from the heavens, not like a lightning bolt, but like a river of liquid starlight. It surged not toward Ash's body, but toward his very soul. He cried out, his body arching as the energy struck him. It was not pain, not precisely. It was everything. It was the crushing pressure of the deepest ocean trench, the searing heat of a volcano's heart, the bone-deep cold of the highest glacier, the dizzying speed of the stratosphere, the crushing weight of a slumbering continent, the silent wisdom of a billion-year-old rock. It was the collective weight and essence of every legendary Pokémon in existence, pouring into him, recognizing him, bonding with him. Pikachu shrieked as a portion of the energy arced into him, his body glowing with a blinding white light. He was the fuse, the conduit, the buffer that kept Ash's mortal body from being incinerated by the raw, divine power. On the back of Ash's right hand, a symbol began to burn itself into his skin. It was a complex sigil, a circle representing the world, crossed by lines and shapes that hinted at the forms of Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina, all centered around a point of light. The Arbiter's mandate. He felt them all. He felt the Regis stirring in their ancient tombs. He felt Lugia's song of the sea. He felt Ho'oa's gaze from the top of the bell tower. He felt the cold fire of Articuno, the crackling energy of Zapdos, the burning spirit of Moltres. They were not his captives. They were his constituents. And he was their voice. The flow of energy ceased. Ash stood panting, sweat beading on his forehead, his body trembling with the aftershocks of the transformation. The mandate on his hand glowed with a soft, golden light. He felt more. He felt the mountain under his feet, the fractured sky above his head, the life force of every being for 100 miles. Time resumed. With a final, agonizing groan, Dialga's power failed. The void surged, a final, killing blow. Ash acted. He didn't think. He felt. He raised his newly marked hand. He didn't shout a command or fire a beam of energy. He reached out with his will, with the new, infinite sense of connection he possessed. He pushed past Dialga and Palkia's pain and terror, past their divine rage, and touched the core of their beings. He did not project power. He projected peace. He projected understanding. He projected the unwavering calm he had learned at the heart of the Tree of Beginning. "It's okay," he sent to them, a thought as gentle as a whisper and as powerful as a star. "I'm here. We're here. Together." A wave of pure, golden-white energy, the color of the mandate on his hand, pulsed outward from him. It was not an attack. It was an affirmation. The energy washed over Dialga and Palkia. Their trembling subsided. The corrosive marks on their hides began to fade. Their frantic, terrified energy was soothed, replaced by a steady, focused strength drawn from Ash's own resolute spirit. They turned their heads, their divine eyes locking with his. There was no longer fear in their gaze. There was acknowledgement. Trust. Together, with a shared will, they turned to face the void. Dialga roared, and Palkia shrieked. But this time, their attacks were not desperate, chaotic blasts. Guided by Ash's will, their power became focused, harmonic. Dialga didn't just blast the void with time, it created a localized temporal lock, a bubble of frozen moments around the void's edge. Palkia didn't just tear at space, it reinforced the boundaries of the bubble, weaving the fabric of reality into a prison wall. The advance of the nothingness stopped. The silent, creeping maw was held at bay, contained within a shimmering, impossibly complex cage of space and time. The cracks in the sky began to seal, the raw energy within them receding. From her position on the ground, Cynthia watched, her scientific mind unable to process what her eyes were seeing. Ash hadn't commanded them like a trainer commanding a Pokémon. He had harmonized with them. He had become the conductor of a divine orchestra, and through him, their cacophony had become a symphony. The boy she knew, the champion she respected, had become something else entirely. Something more. High above, hidden in the glare of the unfolding dawn, a small, stealth black drone hovered silently. Its optical sensors, capable of reading energy signatures across the electromagnetic spectrum, recorded everything. The arrival of Arceus. The bestowal of the power. The sigil burning itself onto Ash's hand. The calming of two gods. The containment of a universe-ending threat. Miles away, in a darkened, subterranean command center, that data streamed onto a holographic display. A man in a stark, gray military uniform, his face sharp and impassive, watched the display with cold, analytical eyes. Commander Valerius of the Aegis Initiative did not see a miracle. He saw a threat matrix that had just gone off the charts. "Sir," a technician said, her voice trembling slightly. "All our threat models are obsolete. The energy readings are astronomical. What are we looking at?" Valerius's gaze was fixed on the image of Ash, his hand glowing, standing as an equal between two gods. He saw a single individual wielding power that could hold nations, continents, the entire world hostage. He saw a variable so large it broke every equation of global security. "He's not a champion anymore," Valerius said, his voice quiet, devoid of emotion. "He's a target." He tapped a control on his console, opening a new file classification. Update the asset profile. New designation, God King. Threat priority, Alpha. Back on Spear Pillar, the immediate danger had passed. The void was contained, for now. Arceus had faded back into the golden light from whence it came, its purpose fulfilled. Dialga and Palkia stood as silent, weary sentinels, guarding their prison. Ash lowered his hand, the glow of the mandate fading to a faint, silvery tracing on his skin. The sheer adrenaline of the moment drained away, replaced by an exhaustion so profound it was a physical weight. The weight of 1,000 plates. Cynthia finally found her feet and rushed to his side, her hand resting on his arm, a grounding touch of humanity. "Ash," she started, her voice a mix of awe and deep, profound worry. What do we do now?" Before he could answer, a sound cut through the thin mountain air. It started as a low whine, then escalated to a high-pitched, terrifying scream. Ash and Cynthia looked up. Streaking across the newly mended sky, their fuselages reflecting the light of the rising sun, was a squadron of sleek, black jets. They moved with an unnatural speed and agility, banking in perfect formation as they descended upon the peak. They weren't commercial planes or League patrol craft. They were weapons. And they were coming for him. Chapter 2, The Tyrant and the Tides. The rain over Hoenn wasn't rain. It was a solid, percussive wall of water, a deluge so thick it seemed Kyogre was trying to turn the sky back into the sea from which it was born. Each drop was the size of an acorn, and it fell with a force that dented cars and cratered the muddy ground. Cyclonic winds tore at the coastline, peeling roofs from houses like can lids. Further inland, the earth trembled with a deep, rhythmic anger, the seismic signature of Groudon on the march. It wasn't a storm, it was a tantrum thrown by the planet itself. From the cockpit of the private jet loaned to them by the Sinnoh League, the scene below was a terrifying painting of chaos. Ash Ketchum stared down at the churning, slate-gray ocean, his reflection a grim, pale mask in the reinforced glass. Sootopolis City, a jewel carved into a meteorite crater, was in dire peril. The single, narrow entrance to the caldera was being battered by waves that were scraping the sky, each one threatening to breach the ancient walls and drown the city in a single, catastrophic flood. "They're not fighting each other," Cynthia said, her voice tight with concentration. She was monitoring a half-dozen data feeds on a tablet linked to the jet satellite uplink, weather patterns, seismic readings, emergency service reports. The epicenter of the seismic activity is 20 miles inland. Kyogre is circling the coast. Their rage is undirected. Or rather, it's directed at dozens of targets simultaneously. "The hollows," Ash stated. It wasn't a question. He could feel them, a scattering of cold, dead spots in the vibrant tapestry of Hoenn's life force. They were like static on a radio, disrupting the natural song of the world, and the two most powerful instruments in the orchestra were trying to drown them out with pure, brute force. "Pika-Pi," Pikachu murmured from Ash's shoulder, his small claws digging into the fabric of his jacket. The little mouse felt it too, a fundamental wrongness that made his fur prickle. Latios, flying alongside the jet in a shimmer of invisible energy, sent a pulse of agreement into Ash's mind. They are wounds. Open sores in the world. The great ones feel them and are maddened by the pain. Ash closed his eyes, extending his senses through the mandate on his hand. The faded silver lines warmed slightly as he connected to the fray. He felt Kyogre's cold, deep ocean fury, a rage born of a violation to its domain. He felt Groudon's molten, tectonic wrath, the anger of a creator whose land was being infested with something sterile and foul. And he felt the hollows. They were like holes in a photograph, patches of missing information. Corrupted, empty shells of Pokémon, Gyarados with vacant, staring eyes unleashing a hyper beam of pure gray light that didn't explode but seemed to age the cliffside it struck, a herd of Zebstrika whose crackling lightning was black and silent, draining the life from the very air. These weren't just monsters, they were anti-life. And they were appearing from shimmering, heat-haze rifts just like the one he'd seen on the news feeds from Celestic Town. Nihilus's subtle invasion had become an open infestation. "Steven's on the line," Cynthia announced, tapping her earpiece. She listened for a moment, her brow furrowed. "His Metagross is coordinating the city's defenses, but the sea wall won't hold for more than an hour. The evacuation is a mess, the quakes have taken out the main bridge." She looked at Ash, her expression dire. "He needs a miracle." Ash opened his eyes. The calm was back, a quiet island in the center of the storm. "Then we'll give him one." He turned away from the window. "Tell the pilot to get clear. We're going in." He didn't wait for a reply. He walked to the jet's rear cargo door, Pikachu solid on his shoulder. "Latios, with me." The psychic Pokémon phased through the fuselage, its form solidifying in the cargo bay. Ash hit the switch, and the ramp began to lower with a hydraulic hiss, letting in a screaming blast of wind and a horizontal spray of rain. The world outside was a gray, violent blur. "Ash, what's the plan?" Cynthia called out over the roar. "Triage," he yelled back, his jacket whipping around him. "Kyogre is the immediate threat to the city. Groudon is the larger environmental danger. The Hollows are the source of the infection. We can't fight a three-front war." He strode down the ramp to the very edge, the wind tearing at him, and looked out into the heart of the storm. He wasn't looking at the sea or the land. He was looking up. He closed his eyes and reached out, not with his voice, but with the full, resonant power of the Arbiter's mandate. It wasn't a summons or a command. It was a call for aid, a signal flare of pure intent sent into the heavens, aimed at the one being who considered the sky its sole dominion. He sent the feeling of a world out of balance, of a sky weeping, of a land shaking. He sent a plea for the great mediator to return. For a moment, there was nothing but the howl of the wind. Then, the storm clouds, thick, black, and churning, began to part. Not blown away by the wind, but pushed aside from above by an immense, unseen presence. A hole of clear, calm sky opened directly above Ash, a perfect circle in the raging tempest. From that circle, a green serpent descended. Rayquaza was a living myth, a creature of emerald scales and golden runes, its serpentine body moving with an impossible grace. It did not fly so much as it swam through the air, its roar a sharp, piercing cry that cut through the storm's fury and imposed its own authority. Its eyes, burning yellow suns, fixed on the tiny human figure on the ramp of the jet. It saw the mark on his hand, felt the echo of Arceus's will, and understood. This was not a trainer to be tested. This was a partner to be heeded. "All right," Ash breathed, a small, grim smile touching his lips. He hopped onto Latios's back, Cynthia climbing on behind him, her arms wrapping securely around his waist. "Let's get to work." Latios shot off the ramp, a blue blur diving into the chaos. The jet behind them banked sharply, retreating to a safe altitude. Ash, Cynthia, and Pikachu were now a tiny island of resolve in a world tearing itself apart. Ash leaned forward, patting Latios's neck. "Get me between Groudon and the coast. Keep us high." To Rayquaza, he projected a thought, accompanied by a mental image. "The big one. The red one. Intercept its attacks on the city. Don't engage directly. Just run interference. Keep it occupied." Rayquaza gave a sharp cry of understanding. It angled its descent, a green meteor streaking toward the distant, shaking coastline where columns of magma were beginning to erupt from fissures in the ground. "Cynthia," Ash said, his voice steady in her ear despite the gale. "I need you to be my eyes. Tell me where the hollows are thickest, especially near Kyogre. That's what's driving it into a frenzy." "Understood," she replied, her own fear sublimated into a steely focus. She brought up a tactical map on her tablet, its screen shielded from the rain by a psychic barrier Latias had subtly extended around them. There's a massive cluster of them 5 miles offshore. It looks like they're coming from a rift directly in Kyogre's path. That's our target. Ash's gaze hardened. Pikachu, get ready. We're going fishing. The scene was one of primal warfare. Kyogre, a living embodiment of the ocean's power, breached the surface, its immense body dwarfing the churning waves. It let loose a roar of pure rage and unleashed a volley of ice beams at a swarm of hollow Sharpedo, their bodies skeletal and their eyes vacant. The beams froze the abominations solid, but more were already pouring from a shimmering, underwater rift. The frustration was driving Kyogre mad. It turned its fury on the land, its body glowing as it gathered water for a cataclysmic origin pulse aimed directly at Sootopolis. Before the sphere of pressurized water could be launched, a green thunderbolt slammed into the ocean beside it. Rayquaza, having arrived with impossible speed, unleashed a dragon ascent, rocketing skyward and creating a concussive blast that dispersed Kyogre's gathering energy. The sky-high Pokémon let out a challenging roar, not of aggression, but of warning. Not the city, Groudon, miles away, took the distraction as an opportunity. It stomped its colossal foot, and a line of precipice blades, jagged spears of pure earth and magma, erupted from the ground, racing toward the city walls from the landward side. But Rayquaza was already moving. It dove, twisting its body into a living shield, and met the blades with a flurry of Dragon Pulse attacks, shattering them into a rain of harmless rock and steam. It was a masterful display of divine power, but it was a holding action. Rayquaza was one being, trying to placate 2 enraged gods and a parasitic invasion. It can't keep this up forever, Cynthia said, her voice taut. The quakes are getting stronger. It doesn't have to, Ash replied. Latios, take us in. Low and fast. Latios banked, skimming the tops of the 30-foot waves, a barely visible blur against the gray water. They streaked past the enraged Kyogre, which was now occupied with fending off Rayquaza's aerial harassment. Their target was the shimmering rift beneath the waves, the source of the hollows. Pikachu, full power. Ash yelled. Aim for the center of that rift. Volt crash. Pikachu had been waiting. He was a compressed spring of bioelectricity. With a defiant cry of Pikachu, he leaped from Ash's shoulder, his body igniting with an incandescent yellow-white light. He became a living thunderbolt, a bolt of pure, unadulterated life energy, and plunged into the sea. The effect was staggering. The Volt Crash attack, amplified by Pikachu's own immense power and the righteous fury he felt, struck the underwater rift. It wasn't a normal explosion. A dome of brilliant light erupted from beneath the waves, and for a moment, the sea itself was electrified. The hollows caught in the blast didn't just faint, their corrupted forms destabilized, dissolving into motes of gray dust. The rift wavered, its connection to Nihilus's void severed by the overwhelming torrent of life energy. It flickered, and then snapped shut. Kyogre felt the change instantly. The source of the immediate pain in its domain was gone. Its frantic rage subsided by a fraction, its attention shifting from blind fury to confusion. It was in that moment of hesitation that the new threat arrived. They came from the north, a squadron of 12 sleek, gunmetal-gray jets flying in a perfect, menacing V formation. They moved with a silence and speed that was unnatural, their engines leaving no contrails, only a faint distortion in the air. Aegis had arrived. A voice, cold and authoritative, crackled over a broad-spectrum frequency that Latios intercepted and fed directly into Ash's mind. Arbiter. This is Commander Valerius of the Aegis Initiative. The legendary Pokémon Kyogre and Groudon represent a clear and present danger to the citizens of Hoenn. Your presence is exacerbating the situation. Power down your assets and stand down. We will handle the containment. Ash watched as the Aegis jets fanned out. Hatches on their underbellies opened, deploying not missiles, but strange, complex devices. 2 jets swooped low over Groudon, dropping sonic emitters that slammed into the ground and began to pulse with a low-frequency wave that made the air hum. Groudon roared in pain and confusion, its movements becoming sluggish. Simultaneously, 4 other jets formed a perimeter around Kyogre. They fired energized pylons into the sea, which instantly unfurled into a massive energy net, designed to ensnare the great whale and drain its power. "They're not trying to help," Cynthia said, her voice a horrified whisper. "They're trying to capture them." Valerius's voice came again, colder this time. "This is your only warning, Arbiter. Stand down, or you will be considered a hostile combatant." Ash was faced with an impossible choice. Let Aegis contain the Titans, leaving them crippled and vulnerable to the next wave of hollows, or intervene and declare war on the one human force that seemed organized enough to fight. The choice took him less than a heartbeat. These Titans were the planet's immune system. You don't poison the cure just because the symptoms are violent. "Latios, get Cynthia to Steven," Ash projected, his thoughts sharp and clear. "Help him with the evacuation." Cynthia's arms tightened around him. "Ash, no. You can't fight them alone." "I'm not fighting them," Ash said, his voice dangerously calm. "I'm disarming them." He gave Rayquaza a new instruction, a clear image of an Aegis jet's wing-mounted weapon pod. "Break their toys." No casualties. He slid off Latios's back, landing with impossible lightness on Kyogre's broad, wet head. The Titan flinched, its massive eye rolling back to glare at him. But instead of anger, it felt the calm, resolute power of the mandate, a silent promise of aid. Latios, with a worried cry, shot toward the city, carrying a protesting Cynthia. Rayquaza acknowledged its new orders with a sharp hiss. It abandoned its dance with Groudon and shot like a bullet toward the Aegis squadron. One of the jets tried to lock on, but Rayquaza was too fast. It didn't use its teeth or claws. It opened its great maw and fired a hyper beam, not at the jet's cockpit, but with surgical precision at the pylon holding the energy net projector. The pylon exploded in a shower of sparks, and a quarter of the net collapsed into the sea. Ash, meanwhile, stood his ground on Kyogre's head as the net continued to close. "Pikachu, back with me," he yelled. Pikachu, having just scrambled back onto Kyogre's flank, leaped to his shoulder. "The net projectors, Pika. Short them out. Pikachu." With a flick of his tail, Pikachu unleashed a controlled, focused thunderbolt, not a wide arc of lightning, but a concentrated spear of electricity that lanced out and struck the nearest Aegis pylon. The device sparked violently and went dead. On the bridge of the Aegis flagship, the Spear of Reason, Commander Valerius watched the tactical display with disbelief turning to cold fury. His state-of-the-art containment gear, a multi-trillion-dollar investment, was being dismantled with contemptuous ease. The Arbiter wasn't even using a legendary to attack his forces, he was using his pet mouse. "He's not fighting us," an analyst stammered. "He's de-escalating. He's toying with us," Valerius snarled, his knuckles white where he gripped the console. He saw Ash's actions not as mercy, but as the ultimate act of condescension. It was a god swatting away the feeble efforts of mortals, a demonstration that Aegis and all of humanity's might were nothing but a nuisance to him. The trauma of his past, his family lost in the collateral damage of a battle just like this, welled up, twisted by his fear of this new, absolute power. "All forward batteries, get a lock on the Arbiter. Fire a warning shot." Before the order could be carried out, the flagship's sensors screamed. Latias, a red and white blur, appeared directly in front of their view screen. It didn't attack. Its eyes glowed, and it unleashed a powerful wave of psychic energy. Inside the Aegis cockpit, every screen went haywire. Targeting systems showed a dozen Kyogres. Radar depicted a sky filled with hundreds of Rayquazas. Their sensors were flooded with so much contradictory phantom data that their advanced battle network crashed. They were blind, deaf, and helpless. With their technology neutralized, Ash could finally address the root cause. He placed a hand on Kyogre's head, the mandate glowing softly. He didn't send a command. He sent a feeling, the quiet of the deep ocean, the satisfaction of a full belly, the peace of a long slumber. He shared his own calm, a counterwave to the Titan's panic. The threat is passing. Be at peace. The sea is yours and it is safe. He did the same for Groudon, sending a sense of the Earth's deep, slow patience, the warmth of the planet's core, the strength of granite. The land is whole. Rest, the effect was slow, but profound. The Titans, their rage no longer fueled by the hollows and their confusion no longer amplified by Aegis's weapons, began to calm. The torrential rain softened to a steady downpour. The seismic tremors lessened, then ceased. With a final, weary bellow, Groudon turned and began its slow retreat into a newly formed magma tube. Kyogre, with a long, mournful cry that was a question and a thank you, dove deep, vanishing into the abyssal depths. The storm broke. Sunlight, brilliant and warm, pierced the clouds. The Aegis jets, their systems slowly rebooting, hovered in disarray. Their mission was a catastrophic failure. They had been rendered utterly impotent without a single casualty. Humiliated. Valerius stared at the main view screen, now showing a clear image of Ash standing on a calm sea, being gently lifted by a psychic hold from Latias. The commander's face was a mask of stone, but his mind was a whirlwind. He had come here to contain a monster and had been swatted aside like a fly. The Arbiter hadn't just defeated him. He had proven him irrelevant. The fear Valerius felt was no longer just for the world. It was for his own waning place in it. His mission was no longer just containment. It was personal. The sun was setting, painting the newly placid sea in hues of orange and violet. The beach, littered with the debris of the storm, was quiet save for the gentle lapping of the waves. Ash sat on a smooth, water-worn log, staring out at the horizon. The weight of the day, of the past 2 days, was a physical thing, pressing down on his shoulders. Pikachu was asleep in his lap, exhausted. Rayquaza had returned to the stratosphere, its duty done. Latios and Latias were patrolling the coastline, ethereal guardians in the twilight. He heard the soft crunch of boots on sand and turned. Cynthia walked toward him, her long coat billowing in the gentle evening breeze. She had a blanket draped over one arm and 2 steaming mugs in her hands. She sat down beside him, the log groaning in protest. "Steven sends his thanks," she said, her voice soft. "And his apologies. He's been ordered not to interact with you further, pending a league decision." She handed him a mug. It was rich, dark coffee. There were no casualties. "Good," Ash said, the single word carrying a world of relief. He took a long sip of the coffee, the warmth a welcome comfort. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the first stars appear in the clear sky. The silence wasn't awkward, it was a shared space, a mutual exhale after a battle for the world. Cynthia's gaze fell to the silver mark on his hand, which was resting on his knee. It seemed to shimmer faintly in the dying light. She reached out, her fingers gently tracing the intricate lines. Her touch was hesitant, inquisitive. "Does it hurt?" she asked. Ash looked at her, and he knew she wasn't asking about the physical sensation of the mandate. She was asking about the weight, the responsibility, the fear. He shook his head, his gaze returning to the ocean. "No. It's just, loud. It's like I can hear everything, all at once. Every Pokémon. Every beat of the planet's heart." He took a breath. "And I can feel how scared they are." Her hand didn't move from his. It rested there, a small point of warmth and grounding reality in the cosmic storm of his new senses. Her thumb gently stroked the back of his hand. "They're not the only ones." He met her eyes. In them, he saw not the champion of Sinnoh or the brilliant scholar, but a friend, deeply and genuinely worried for him. Before he could respond, a figure approached them from the dunes. It was Steven Stone, his tailored suit looking out of place on the rustic beach. His usual suave demeanor was gone, replaced by a weary formality. Ash. Cynthia, he said, his voice strained. I'm glad you're both safe. Hoenn owes you a debt it can never repay. We were just happy to help, Stephen, Ash said, starting to get to his feet. Stephen held up a hand. Please. Stay seated. He sighed, running a hand through his silver hair. I've just come from an emergency video conference with the Pokemon League Alliance. All champions, all Elite Fours. And? Cynthia prompted, her voice sharp. Stephen's gaze was fixed on Ash. They're terrified. Valerius and the Aegis Initiative have presented their report. They've framed the Hoenn incident as an act of aggression on your part. They're painting you as a rogue element who has subjugated the forces of nature and attacked a sanctioned security force. That's a lie, Ash said, his voice low and dangerous. It's politics, Stephen countered grimly. And right now, you are the most terrifying political issue on the planet. They've called an emergency summit. In Unova. The location is neutral ground. He paused, the final blow landing with quiet gravity. They're not inviting you as the world monarch, Ash. They're summoning you. They want you to appear before the Alliance and answer for what you've become. The calm of the evening was shattered. The peace they had fought so hard for had lasted only a few hours. The battle with gods and monsters was over. The battle with humanity was just beginning. Chapter 3, The Crown of Thorns. The air in Castelia City was a thick, humid cocktail of sea salt, roasted chestnuts from a street vendor's cart, and the faint, acrid tang of ambition. It was a city that never slept, a vertical forest of glass and steel where fortunes were made and lost in the time it took a traffic light to change. Today, it was holding its breath. The usual cacophony of car horns and shouting businesspeople was muted, replaced by a low, anxious murmur that seemed to seep from the very concrete. The Pokemon League Alliance had chosen their venue well. The Unity Tower was the tallest building in Unova, a monument of polished black granite and tinted glass that scraped the sky like a shard of obsidian. It was a place designed to make one feel small, an architectural declaration of power and authority. As Ash and Cynthia stepped out of the armored transport that had brought them from the airport, they were greeted not by a welcoming party, but by a phalanx of grim-faced international police officers in severe gray uniforms, their hands resting near the pokeballs on their belts. Charming, Cynthia murmured, her voice a low, dry note as she smoothed the front of her black dress coat. She had traded her adventurer's attire for the severe elegance of a stateswoman, but her eyes were the same, sharp, analytical, and missing nothing. Ash said nothing. He adjusted the collar of the simple, dark blue tunic he wore, a stark contrast to the formal suits and uniforms around them. He looked less like a man on trial and more like someone who had wandered into the wrong building. But his calm was not ignorance, it was a shield. His gaze swept over the officers, the towering building, the distant crowds held back by barricades. He took it all in, processed it, and filed it away. The mandate on his hand, hidden beneath a simple leather glove, was a cool, quiet weight. Pikachu, perched on his shoulder, was a small, tense ball of yellow fur. His ears swiveled, catching snippets of hushed conversation, the crackle of earpieces, the nervous energy of the crowd. His little black nose twitched, and his cheeks sparked with a low, almost subliminal static. He was a perfect barometer for the room, and the pressure was rising. They were escorted in silence through a lobby of cavernous, echoing marble. Their footsteps were the only sound. The air was sterile, chilled to an unnatural degree. It was the antithesis of the vibrant, living energy of the Tree of Beginning or the raw, primal chaos of the Hoenn Coast. This was the heart of the human world, and it felt as lifeless as one of Nihilus's dead zones. The summit chamber was at the very top of the tower. It was a circular room, its outer wall a single, seamless pane of glass offering a god's eye view of the sprawling metropolis below. In the center, arranged in a formidable circle, were the leaders of the global Pokemon leagues. Alder, Unova's retired but still revered champion, sat with a grim look that had aged him a decade. Iris, his vibrant successor, watched Ash with wide, uncertain eyes. Diantha of Kalos, the picture of grace, had her fingers steepled before her, her expression unreadable. Lance, the stoic champion of Kanto and Johto, stared at Ash with the hard, uncompromising gaze of a dragon master judging a potential threat. Every champion, every Elite Four member, every league president, they were all there. The most powerful people in the world, and they were all looking at him. There was an empty chair for him. Not at the table with them, but set slightly apart, in the middle of the circle. It wasn't a seat, it was a defendant's dock. A man with a severe haircut and the unmistakable air of a bureaucrat, a man Ash vaguely recognized as the Alliance's Secretary-General, cleared his throat. Mr. Ketchum, he began, the use of the simple honorific a deliberate and calculated slight. We have convened this emergency session to address the unprecedented events of the past several days. Specifically, the emergence of your new status, and your subsequent actions in the Hoenn region. Ash walked calmly to the chair but did not sit. He stood before them, Pikachu a spot of defiant color in the monochromatic room. Cynthia stood a few paces behind him, a silent, supportive shadow. I'm here to answer your questions, Ash said, his voice even and clear, carrying easily in the acoustically perfect room. Lance leaned forward, his red hair like a splash of fire. A simple question to begin, then. By what right do you command the very forces that govern this planet? By what authority have you appointed yourself the keeper of gods? It wasn't a right I sought, or an authority I appointed myself, Ash replied simply. It was a responsibility I was given. There is a threat, ah yes, the threat, a new voice cut in, slick and confident. All heads turned. Commander Valerius strode into the room, flanked by two Aegis commandos in charcoal gray body armor. He was charismatic, handsome in a severe way, and he moved with the predatory grace of a man who was utterly convinced of his own righteousness. He gave a curt, dismissive nod to the assembled leaders before his eyes locked on Ash. The unseen, unnamed enemy you claim only you can fight, Valerius continued, a small, condescending smile on his lips. An enemy whose existence provides a convenient justification for the single greatest consolidation of power in recorded history. Forgive us for being skeptical, Arbiter. He gestured to the wall, and a massive holographic screen flickered to life behind him. What we do have evidence of is this. The footage from Hoenn played out. It was a masterclass in propaganda. Quick, jarring cuts showed Groudon's precipice blades erupting from the earth, framed to look like an unprovoked attack on Sootopolis. It showed Kyogre's immense form, breaching the waves in what looked like pure destructive fury. Then, it showed Ash, standing atop Kyogre's head, the camera angle making him look like a conqueror taming a beast. The audio was a chaotic mix of roars and explosions. Then came the Aegis intervention. The footage showed Rayquaza, a green blur of violence, slamming into the ocean. It showed the creature's hyper beam obliterating an Aegis weapon pylon. It showed Pikachu's thunderbolt lancing out, causing another device to explode. It showed Latia's psychic assault, and the Aegis flagship screens dissolving into static. The context, that Rayquaza was dispersing a city-killing attack, that the pylons were part of a capture device, that the psychic attack was non-lethal, was completely absent. It was expertly crafted to show one thing, Ash Ketchum and his divine army attacking a sanctioned human security force that was trying to protect civilians. When the footage ended, the room was thick with a tense, hostile silence. My forces were attempting to contain two Class 5 legendary threats engaged in a catastrophic rampage, Valerius said, his voice ringing with conviction. We were met with overwhelming force, not from the Titans, but from the man who claims to be the world's protector. He did not assist us. He did not cooperate. He neutralized my fleet with contemptuous ease and asserted his dominance over the very forces of nature we were trying to subdue. He turned, his gaze sweeping across the faces of the champions. The question is not whether Mr. Ketchum has this power. We have all seen that he does. The question is whether any one man can be trusted with it. What happens when his protection conflicts with our laws? With our sovereignty? Who holds the God King accountable when he decides he knows best? The accusations hung in the air, potent and poisonous. Ash listened to it all, his expression unchanging. He let the silence stretch for a beat, letting the weight of Valerius's words settle. Then he spoke, his voice still calm, but with an edge of cold steel. "You're right about one thing, Commander," Ash began. "I did neutralize your fleet. Because your containment would have crippled two essential guardians of this planet, leaving them vulnerable and leaving Hoenn defenseless against the real threat." Cynthia stepped forward, holding her tablet. "A threat your sensors conveniently failed to register, Commander. Or perhaps you chose to omit them from your report." A new image appeared on the holoscreen, overriding Valerius's display. It was data from her own sensors, cross-referenced with satellite imagery. It showed the shimmering rifts, the clusters of hollow Pokémon, their unique, life-draining energy signatures highlighted in stark red. "These are the hollows. We tracked dozens of them. They were the source of the Titan's rage. They are wounds in the fabric of reality, and their presence drives primal Pokémon into a frenzy. Capturing Groudon and Kyogre would have been like chloroforming a guard dog while burglars are breaking into the house." Her intervention shifted the dynamic. She wasn't just Ash's companion, she was a champion, a scientist, and her evidence was irrefutable. Doubt began to flicker in the eyes of the other leaders. Valerius's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Unverified phenomena. Potentially a byproduct of the Titan's own destructive power. Or potentially the unnamed enemy you were so quick to dismiss, Cynthia countered coolly. The one Arceus itself saw fit to appoint an arbiter to combat. The mention of Arceus sent another murmur through the room. It was one thing to doubt Ash Ketchum. It was another thing entirely to question the judgment of the original one. The debate was escalating, the chamber becoming a pressure cooker of fear, politics, and ideology, when a new sound intruded from the world outside. Faint at first, then growing louder. A rhythmic chanting, the collective roar of 1,000 angry voices. "No. God. Kings. No. God. Kings." Everyone turned to the massive window. Far below, the crowd had broken through the barricades and was surging toward the base of the Unity Tower. They were a sea of angry, frightened faces, waving signs that read "One man, too much power" and "The Arbiter is a tyrant." It was the physical manifestation of the fear Valerius had been stoking. "It seems the public shares my concerns," Valerius said with a grim satisfaction. The building's security chief spoke into his comm, his voice strained. "The perimeter is breached. They're at the main entrance." The leaders rose to their feet, their political debate instantly forgotten in the face of immediate, physical threat. The controlled tension of the summit had just been shattered by the uncontrolled chaos of the mob. And then, a shadow fell over them all. It was vast and sudden, plunging the sunlit streets below into an unnatural twilight. The roar of the crowd faltered, replaced by gasps of confusion and terror. Even from the top of the tower, they could see the people looking up, their faces pale with shock. A jagged, chaotic rift tore open the sky above Castelia City. It was not the clean, pearlescent tear of Palkia's power, but a messy, angry wound in reality, lined with shifting, impossible angles and leaking an aura of cold, ancient defiance. From this wound, a form of nightmare and majesty emerged. 6 insectoid legs, tipped with golden claws. 2 vast, spectral wings that seemed to absorb the very light around them. A body of gray and gold plating, with red and black stripes that pulsed with a malevolent energy. Giratina, the lord of the distortion world, had come to the city. It didn't roar. It didn't need to. Its very presence was a violation, an assertion of a different, more chaotic set of physical laws. A low, guttural pulse of energy, a wave of pure intimidation from its shadow force, washed over the street below. The mob didn't scream or run. They froze, then simply scattered. The primal, instinctual fear of a predator that could unmake them was more potent than any political fervor. In seconds, the street was empty. Standing on Giratina's head, as casually as if he were riding a bus, was a young man. He was dressed in dark, functional clothing, with a long, grey coat that billowed in the dimensional winds only he could feel. His hair was the color of ash, and his eyes, a sharp, intelligent grey, swept over the scene with an air of detached amusement. This was Silas. With a final, contemptuous look at the empty streets, he guided Giratina to the side of the Unity Tower. The renegade Pokémon clung to the glass and granite with its golden claws, its massive, alien face peering into the summit chamber. The champions and leaders stumbled back, their hands flying to their Pokeballs. Silas hopped from Giratina's head onto the wide ledge outside the window, as nonchalant as if he were stepping off a curb. He tapped on the glass. For a moment, everyone was too stunned to move. Finally, a terrified aide remotely unlocked the window, and it slid open. Silas stepped inside, a faint aura of the distortion world's cold still clinging to him. He ignored the guards and the champions, his gaze landing directly on Ash. "See," he said, his voice a smooth, confident tenor. "That's how you handle a mob. Not with words or understanding. With a clear and undeniable demonstration of power. You quiet the noise so the important conversation can continue." He then turned to the stunned assembly. "You sit here and debate while the world burns," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You argue about rights and sovereignties and who is to be trusted. They are the wrong questions." He gestured dismissively at Ash. "He offers you balance. He wants to be a gentle shepherd, tending to a flock of wolves and sheep alike. A noble, but ultimately foolish goal." His gaze became hard, intense. "I offer you something far more valuable, order. The world is sick. It is chaotic. It needs a firm, unyielding hand to crush that chaos, to excise the disease so the body can heal. A surgeon does not reason with a cancer, he cuts it out. I am that surgeon." He spread his hands, an emperor making his case. "So that is your choice. Not between this man and your own feeble authority. The choice is between his way, and mine. The balanced chaos of 1,000 competing wills," he nodded at Ash, "or the absolute peace of one." The room was silent, caught between three impossible poles. Ash's harmony, Silas's order, and Valerius's humanity-first doctrine. It was a battle of philosophies, with the fate of the world as the prize. Finally, Alder, his age lending him a gravitas the others lacked, spoke. "And who, boy, are you to make such a claim?" Silas smiled, a thin, arrogant curve of his lips. "I am the one with the will to do what is necessary." It was then that Ash spoke, breaking his long silence. His voice was quiet, drawing the focus of the entire room. He wasn't looking at Silas, or Valerius, or any of the champions. He was looking at Pikachu, who was watching the proceedings with bright, intelligent eyes. "You know," Ash said, a strange, almost nostalgic tone in his voice, "for the longest time, the only world I ever wanted to conquer was the Pokémon League. The only crown I ever wanted was a trophy." He finally lifted his head, his gaze sweeping over them all, clear and direct. This is a job. And I didn't apply for it." The simple, unadorned honesty of the statement did more to disarm the tension than any grand speech could have. It completely reframed the argument. He wasn't a power seeker. He was a draftee in a war no one else could see. Silas's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. Valerius's jaw clenched. They could argue against a tyrant. They could debate a god-king. But how did you fight a man who didn't want the power he held? The summit was adjourned shortly after, ending in a complete stalemate. The leaders were more divided than ever, torn between the terrifying known of Ash, the terrifying unknown of Silas, and the seductive but clearly outmatched promises of Valerius. No decision was made. No mandate was given. Ash was left in a political limbo, a king without a kingdom, a protector without a people. Later, during a recess, Cynthia found him standing by the great window, looking down at the city lights beginning to glitter in the encroaching dusk. The weight on his shoulders was almost visible, a slump in his posture that hadn't been there that morning. Pikachu was dozing on the window ledge, a small patch of peaceful oblivion. Cynthia came to stand beside him, not speaking for a long moment. They watched the flow of traffic, the endless river of lights, a world moving on, oblivious to the philosophical war that had just been waged for its soul. "They're afraid," she said finally, her voice soft. "Silas, Valerius, the champions, even the people in the street. They look at you and they don't see a savior. They see the end of the world as they know it. They see a power that makes their laws, their armies, their entire way of life, irrelevant." Ash didn't look at her. "I know." She put her hand on his arm, her touch a familiar anchor. "It's not your fault," she said quietly. Then, she added, her voice full of a shared weight, a deep and profound understanding of the impossible position he was in, "but it is your problem." He finally turned to look at her, and in the dim light of the summit chamber, he saw the depth of her belief in him. It was a belief that went beyond his power, beyond his title. It was for him, Ash, the man who just wanted to win the Pokémon League. A faint, tired smile touched his lips. "Yeah. I know that, too." As they left the now empty chamber to head for their assigned quarters, a figure brushed past them in the corridor. A man in a rumpled trench coat, with a perpetually worried expression. It was Looker, of the International Police. He didn't stop, but as he passed Cynthia, he pressed a small, folded piece of paper into her hand, his fingers surprisingly strong. "A friend from Sinnoh asked me to pass this along," he whispered, his voice barely audible, his eyes never meeting hers. And then he was gone, disappearing into the evening shadows of the corridor. Cynthia frowned, unfolding the note. It contained only a few hastily scribbled words. "He doesn't know what he's dealing with. The distortion world is rotting from the inside out." She stared at the note, her blood running cold. She looked up at Ash, who was waiting for her at the end of the hall. Silas wasn't just a rival with a radical ideology. His power, the very source of his confidence, Giratina, was compromised. The disease he claimed he wanted to cut out of the world, it was already festering in the heart of his own partner. And it was all part of the same creeping, silent decay that was threatening to unmake everything. Chapter 4, The Heart of the Mountain. The air at the base of Mount Silver was thin, sharp, and carried the acrid stench of sulfur. The legendary Johto Peak, usually a symbol of serene, snow-capped majesty, was in open revolt against itself. Plumes of black, toxic smoke billowed from new vents that had torn themselves open on its slopes, staining the pristine white snow with greasy black soot. The ground vibrated with a low, sickening rhythm, the angry heartbeat of a dying mountain. Glaciers, ancient and immense, were calving with reports like cannon fire, sending avalanches of ice and rock cascading into the valleys below. What had been a tranquil nature preserve a week ago was now a disaster zone. The nearby town of Silver Creek, nestled in a valley that was now directly in the path of the melting ice flows, was in a state of panicked, disorganized chaos. Ash stood on a ridge overlooking the devastation, the wind whipping his dark blue tunic around him. The mandate on his hand was a cold, throbbing ache, a sympathetic pain that resonated with the agony of the mountain itself. He could feel it. Heatran, the dome Pokémon, the living core of the region's volcanic network, was in excruciating pain. It was a pain that had boiled over into a blind, destructive rage. "The decay is deep within the mountain's caldera," Cynthia said, her voice tight with urgency. She was studying a holographic projection of the mountain, a seismic and thermal map created from Ladiosa's high-altitude scans. Red zones, indicating extreme heat and instability, pulsed ominously at the mountain's heart. "The geological structure is collapsing. Heatran isn't causing this, Ash. It's reacting to it. Its home is being eaten from the inside out." "Pikachu," on a nearby rock, was chittering nervously, his tail twitching. He could feel the wrongness of the place, the scent of decay that went beyond mere sulfur. It was the sterile, lifeless signature of Nihilus, a cancer growing in the planet's bones. The town's evacuation has stalled, Cynthia continued, her finger tracing a collapsed road on the map. The main bridge is gone, washed out by the first flash flood. They're trapped. We have maybe 3 hours before the upper glacier gives way completely. When it does, she didn't need to finish the sentence. A wall of water, ice, and rock would obliterate Silver Creek from existence. Ash's jaw was a hard line. He could feel Heatran's agony, a feedback loop of pain and rage that was tearing the mountain apart. He could also feel the terror of the thousands of people trapped in the valley below. 2 sources of suffering, both demanding his attention. I need to get to Heatran, Ash said, his decision made. Calm it down. Calm it down. Cynthia's voice was sharp, cutting through his focus. She shut off the map and turned to face him, her expression a mixture of disbelief and fear. Ash, it's a maddened legendary. It's melting a path through the mountain's core. You can't just walk up to it and ask it to stop. You have to subdue it. Forcefully. No, Ash said, his voice quiet but absolute. It's in pain. Attacking it will only make it worse. It will see me as another threat. Then let it continue its rampage, she shot back, taking a step toward him. This wasn't the calm, strategic Cynthia he knew. This was a woman watching the man she cared for prepare to do something suicidally noble. Let it destroy this entire mountain range and kill everyone in that town. The needs of the many, Ash. That has to matter. It does, he countered, his own voice rising with frustration. But my way of doing this has to matter, too. If I start treating them like problems to be solved instead of living beings to be helped, what's the point? If I stop caring about how they feel, he jabbed a thumb toward the raging peak, even one of them, then what's the point of any of this? I'd be no better than Silas, just with a different justification. Their argument, raw and emotional, hung in the charged air between them. It was their first real conflict, a clash not of intellect, but of fear and principle. She was afraid of losing him to his own compassion. He was afraid of losing himself to the power he wielded. Before the argument could escalate, a new sound joined the mountain's groaning. The high-pitched whine of approaching jet engines. A squadron of Aegis craft, smaller and more agile than the ones from Hoenn, screamed over the ridge and fanned out in a perimeter around the mountain. Valerius's voice, crisp and emotionless, broadcast over an open channel. Arbiter. We have the situation under control. We are deploying a solution. Ash and Cynthia watched as the jets released their payloads. Not bombs or capture nets. They were sleek, silver devices that drilled themselves into the mountainside at precise, calculated intervals. They began to hum, a low, resonant frequency that vibrated through the rock. What are those? Ash asked, a sense of dread coiling in his gut. Cynthia's eyes widened as she pulled up a new data feed on her tablet. Aegis had, with chilling arrogance, published the weapon specifications on a public server for the League Alliance to see. They're called reality anchors, she read, her voice a horrified whisper. Based on dimensional resonance tech, reverse-engineered from Spear Pillar. They don't attack a Pokemon, Ash. They sever its conceptual connection to its domain. She looked at him, the full horror of it dawning on her. They're not trying to capture it or kill it. They're going to lobotomize it. They're going to turn Heatran into a simple beast of rock and fire, disconnected from the planetary core. It will be safe. Docile. Empty. For Valerius, it was the perfect, logical solution. A way to neutralize a divine threat without the messy optics of killing it. For Ash, it was a fate infinitely worse than death. It was the erasure of a soul, the ultimate violation. The argument with Cynthia was forgotten. The immediate threat wasn't the glacier or the maddened legendary. It was the cold, clinical humanity of Commander Valerius. "I won't let them do that," Ash said, his voice a low growl. The mandate on his hand flared with a soft, dangerous light. Cynthia stared at him, then at the humming anchors, then at the raging peak. The cold logic of her argument shattered against the brutal reality of Valerius's solution. She saw the trap. Ash would be forced to attack Aegis to save Heatran, proving Valerius's point that he was a tyrant. Or he'd let them do it, betraying the very principle upon which his power was founded. She made a choice. Her trust in him, in his stubborn, reckless, beautiful empathy, won out over her fear. "The anchors need 10 minutes to fully harmonize before they can fire," she said, her voice now crisp and professional again, the strategist back in control. "The main volcanic conduit runs directly beneath the caldera. It's the only way to reach Heatran quickly. But it's unstable, filled with toxic gas and collapsing tunnels." "I'll manage," Ash said, already turning toward the peak. "You'll need help," she countered. She held up her tablet, showing him a complex geological model. "Heatran's heart, the stable pocket of magma where it lives, has collapsed. The decay is spreading from there. You can't just calm it down, Ash. You have to give it a reason to be calm. You have to give it a new home." An idea, insane and brilliant, sparked in her eyes. "There's a dormant magma chamber 3 miles to the east. Tectonically stable. If you could somehow divert the main flow and create a new heart for the mountain," Ash finished, a grim smile on his face. He looked at her, a silent thank you passing between them. He took a deep breath and reached out with his will, calling on a power he hadn't touched since the day of his transformation. A power of slumbering, continental strength. 5 miles away, in a hidden cavern deep within the mountain's roots, a stone statue began to glow. 3 lights, one red, one blue, one silver, flared to life in its head. Cracks formed along its moss-covered limbs. With a groan that shook the very foundations of Mount Silver, Regigigas, the colossal Pokémon, awoke. The inside of the volcanic conduit was a vision of hell. The air was thick with poisonous fumes that would have killed an ordinary human in seconds, but Ash's new physiology, bolstered by the mandate, filtered them out. The walls of the tunnel were slick with black, molten rock, glowing a dull, menacing red. The heat was immense, a physical presence that pressed in from all sides. Pikachu was inside Ash's jacket, huddled against his chest, shielded from the worst of the heat by a faint aura of his partner's power. Ash moved with a purpose that bordered on inhuman. He leaped over chasms of boiling magma and slid down slopes of treacherous obsidian, his senses, amplified 1,000-fold, guiding him through the collapsing labyrinth. He could feel Heatran's presence ahead, a roaring furnace of pain. He could also feel the hum of the Aegis anchors from the world above, a ticking clock counting down to an atrocity. He burst into a massive cavern, and the heat intensified tenfold. The chamber was a dome of molten rock and fire, the heart of the mountain. And it was diseased. Patches of the wall were a sickly, dull gray, the color of cooling ash. They weren't just cold, they were radiating the same sterile nothingness he'd felt before. The hollow corruption was eating the volcano from the inside out. In the center of the cavern, Heatran scrambled up the walls like a monstrous, metallic spider, its body glowing white-hot with agony. It was slamming itself against the rock, trying to escape the pain of its home dissolving around it. It saw Ash and let out a shriek of pure, undiluted fury, its mouth opening to unleash a torrent of magma. Magma storm. Ash yelled, but not as an attack command. It was a warning. He dove behind a pillar of obsidian just as the swirling vortex of fire and rock incinerated the spot where he had been standing. This was the crux of it. The ultimate test of his philosophy. He couldn't fight. He couldn't reason. He had to connect. He dismissed the other Pokémon he had at his side, sending them back to the safety of their Pokeballs. He wanted Heatran to see that he was alone. Then, he stepped out from behind the pillar. He stood in the center of the cavern, his arms open, his gaze fixed on the maddened legendary. Heatran shrieked again, gathering another attack. It saw only an intruder, another source of pain in its agonizing world. "I'm not here to hurt you," Ash said, his voice calm and steady, though it was barely audible over the roar of the magma. "I'm here to help." He raised his marked hand. The mandate began to glow, a soft, golden light in the fiery cavern. He didn't prepare an attack. He didn't call on another legendary for defense. He reached out with his will and did the one thing no one else in the world would have dared to do. He chose to share Heatran's pain. He pushed his consciousness into the dome Pokemon, not to control it, but to feel what it felt. The instant the connection was made, a scream was torn from Ash's throat. It was absolute agony. It felt like his bones were being ground to dust, his skin flayed by molten steel, his very essence being drained away by the creeping, nihilistic cold of the decay. The pain of a god whose very concept was being unmade was a torment beyond mortal comprehension. He collapsed to one knee, his body trembling, blood trickling from his nose. The feedback was nearly enough to shatter his mind. Pikachu squealed in alarm, his cheeks sparking frantically. But the act of radical, insane empathy had an effect. Heatran's attack faltered. Through its haze of agony, it felt something new. Not an attack. Not a threat. It felt a shared burden. This tiny, fragile creature had willingly taken on a fraction of its torment. The rage in its eyes lessened, replaced by a flicker of confused curiosity. It stopped trying to kill him and simply watched, its body still trembling with pain. Ash pushed himself back to his feet, swaying, his vision swimming. He had its attention. Now, for the hard part. "The mountain is dying," he projected, his thought weak but clear. "But I can give you a new heart. You have to trust me." He reached out again, not with his own power, but as a conduit. He became a living switchboard, connecting the consciousness of the wounded Heatran to the newly awakened Regigigas. On the surface, guided by Cynthia's precise instructions from her tablet, the colossal Pokemon acted. It braced its immense feet, its body glowing with power. It plunged its great, stone hands into the bedrock of Mount Silver. It was not an act of destruction, but of planetary-scale chiropractic. With a groan that was felt for 100 miles, Regigigas began to move the tectonic plates. Deep below, the world shifted. Tunnels collapsed. New ones were forced open. Guided by Ash's harmonizing will, a new channel was opened, connecting the main magma flow to the dormant chamber Cynthia had identified. A river of fresh, vibrant magma, the lifeblood of the planet, began to pour into Heatran's dying heart chamber. It washed over the gray, decayed patches, and the hollow corruption hissed and recoiled, unable to sustain itself in the face of such overwhelming, pure geothermal energy. Then, with a final, titanic shove from Regigigas, the old, decaying chamber was sealed off, a tomb for the dying echo of Nihilus. The new chamber became the mountain's living heart. Heatran watched, its pain lessening as the vibrant, healthy magma flowed around it. It felt the sickness being cut off, the agony receding, replaced by the familiar, comforting warmth of its domain, made new. It looked at Ash, who was now slumped against a rock, pale and exhausted, but with a small, triumphant smile on his face. The rage was gone. The pain was gone. All that was left was a profound, primal sense of gratitude. The vibrations in the mountain ceased. The toxic smoke began to clear. The immediate threat was over. Ash pushed himself up, every muscle protesting. He had done it. He had saved the town, saved the mountain, and saved a god without throwing a single punch. He took one step, then another, before his legs finally gave out. He pitched forward, the darkness of exhaustion claiming him. He didn't hit the ground. A pair of strong, familiar arms caught him. Cynthia was there, her Garchomp standing guard behind her, its body covered in soot and rock dust. She must have followed him in the moment she knew her part was done. Her face, smudged with ash, was a mask of relief and terror. "You idiot," she breathed, her voice thick with emotion as she eased him to the ground, his head resting in her lap. "You magnificent, reckless idiot." He managed a weak grin. But it worked. She just shook her head, a tear tracing a clean path through the soot on her cheek. As she held him, she glanced up toward the cavern's entrance. A figure was standing there, silhouetted against the light of the world outside. Commander Valerius. His Aegis commandos were behind him, their weapons lowered. He must have come down to witness the failure of his anchors and the success of the Arbiter's impossible method. He wasn't holding a weapon. His hands were empty at his sides. His expression, illuminated by the glow of the new heart of the mountain, was not one of anger or frustration. It was something far more dangerous. It was confusion. He had seen his cold, sterile logic fail. He had seen his ultimate solution rendered unnecessary. He had just witnessed a man save the world not by destroying his enemy, but by sharing its pain. His entire worldview, a structure built on the cold calculus of necessary evils and acceptable losses, had just been shaken to its very foundations. And in the eyes of a man like Valerius, confusion was the soil in which fanaticism could grow anew. Chapter 5, The Shadow and the Distortion. The first sign that something was wrong in Driftvale City was the silence. The city, a bustling hub of trade and industry on Unova's western coast, was famous for its cacophony, the groan of cargo ships, the roar of mining equipment from the nearby clay tunnel, the shouts of vendors in its sprawling market. But on this day, a section of the city's industrial waterfront simply went quiet. Not just quiet, but silent. The sound was scooped out of the air, leaving a pocket of unnatural stillness that was more alarming than any explosion. Then, the world tore open. A chaotic, swirling vortex of impossible colors and shifting geometry materialized over the silent docks. It was a wound in reality, and from it, the cold, sterile aura of the distortion world poured out like a noxious gas. Giratina, in its terrifyingly majestic altered for me, emerged, its 6 powerful legs planting themselves on thin air. On its back stood Silas, his gray coat whipping in a non-existent wind, his face a mask of grim determination. Below him, the docks were swarming. Dozens of hollow Pokémon, more than had ever been seen in one place, were pouring from a massive, shimmering rift near a warehouse. A hollow Conkeldurr swung its concrete pillars, not with force, but with an energy that caused the steel girders of a crane to rust and crumble to dust in seconds. A pack of hollow Leopard moved with silent, unnatural speed, their passing leaving trails of gray decay on the asphalt. The local trainers and their Pokémon were fighting a desperate, losing battle, their attacks doing little more than temporarily inconveniencing the unnerving tide. Silas surveyed the scene with a surgeon's cold detachment. He saw the infection, and he saw the healthy tissue of the city around it. His solution was as brutal as it was pragmatic. "Giratina," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Excise the tumor." Giratina's red eyes glowed with malevolent power. It opened its great maw and let out a roar that did not travel through the air, but seemed to vibrate the very space between atoms. A bubble of distorted reality expanded from its mouth, not an attack, but a container. It enveloped a 10-block section of the waterfront, the docks, the warehouses, the rift, the swarm of hollows, and, tragically, the handful of trainers and dockworkers still trapped within the perimeter. Then, with a sickening lurch that made the sky seem to twist, Giratina pulled. The entire section of the city, a massive chunk of earth and steel and concrete, was ripped from the physical world. It didn't crumble or explode. It was simply lifted, like a surgeon removing a biopsy, and dragged wholesale into the swirling, chaotic maw of the distortion world. The rift snapped shut behind it, leaving a perfectly hemispherical crater where a part of Driftvale City had been moments before. The rest of the city was untouched, but the scar on reality, and on the landscape, was absolute. From his vantage point on Latias, high above the clouds, Ash felt the excision as a physical shock, a violent tearing in the fabric of the world. The life signs of dozens of people and Pokemon had just vanished from the physical plane. He didn't, Cynthia breathed, her voice a horrified whisper. Her arms tightened around Ash's waist, her knuckles white. She was watching a live news feed on her tablet, the screen showing a helicopter's shaky footage of the newly formed crater. He just took them. Ash's calm finally broke. A cold, sharp anger, unlike anything he had felt in years, pierced through his practiced serenity. This wasn't a misguided attempt at control like Valerius's. This was a deliberate, calculated sacrifice of innocent lives on the altar of a twisted ideology. Silas had crossed a line. Pikachu, Ash said, his voice dangerously low. Pikachu, who had been watching the scene with wide, angry eyes, looked up at him, his body already crackling with righteous fury. Latias, Ash projected, his thought a blade of cold steel. Get us there. Palkia, be ready. The world dissolved into a blur. Latias, sensing Ash's fury, pushed her speed beyond its limits, a crimson missile streaking across the sky. They arrived over the Driftvale crater moments later, but there was nothing to see but a gaping wound in the earth. The dimensional signature, however, was still fresh. A faint, angry scar in spacetime. He took them to the distortion world to cleanse the area, Cynthia deduced, her mind racing to catch up with the sheer audacity of Silas's act. He'll destroy the hollows, and then, what? What about the people? He probably considers them acceptable losses, Ash growled. He closed his eyes, the mandate on his hand flaring with a brilliant, pearlescent light. He reached across dimensions, his will a beacon calling to the master of space. Reality fractured. A clean, shimmering tear, glowing with a healthy pink energy, opened before them. It was a stark contrast to the messy, violent rift Giratina had created. Palkia's immense head emerged, its red eyes glowing with concern and a shared sense of indignation. He oversteps, Palkia projected, its thought a low rumble of cosmic disapproval. He uses the master's gift for butchery, I'm going after him, Ash stated. I need a stable path, Palkia. And I need you with me. This is his home turf. Palkia gave a curt nod of agreement. Latias shot through the portal, Ash and Cynthia on her back, with Palkia entering right behind them, the portal snapping shut, leaving the skies of Unova quiet once more. The distortion world was a headache made manifest. It was a dimension of vertigo and nonsense, a chaotic landscape of floating islands of rock, waterfalls that flowed sideways, and forests of crystalline trees that grew upside down. Gravity was a suggestion, not a law. The sky was a swirling nebula of purple and black, with no discernible sun or moon. It was a dimension that ran on emotion and defiance, the perfect kingdom for a renegade god. In the distance, on a large, floating platform of rock, the battle was already underway. Giratina, in its bipedal, serpentine origin for me, was a whirlwind of destructive power. It swooped and dove through the air, tearing through the hollows with shadow force attacks that made them dissolve into nothing. Silas stood on a high ledge, directing the battle like a conductor, his face impassive. The chunk of Driftvale's waterfront sat on the platform, a bizarre, misplaced piece of reality in this impossible landscape. The few surviving trainers and their Pokémon were huddled behind a pile of shipping containers, caught in the crossfire, their faces masks of sheer terror. There! Cynthia shouted, pointing. Ash didn't need the direction. He was already locked on, his anger a cold, focused point of light. Latias, get Cynthia and the others to safety. Palkia, with me. Latias peeled off, a red streak heading for the terrified civilians. Ash leaped from her back, landing seamlessly on Palkia's broad shoulder as the god of space roared its challenge. The sound echoed unnaturally in the chaotic dimension, a declaration of order in a realm of chaos. Silas turned, his eyes narrowing as he saw them. A flicker of surprise, then a condescending smirk. Come to witness true justice, Arbiter. I'm simply cleaning up a mess you were too slow to address. You call this justice? Ash shot back, his voice booming with Palkia's borrowed power. You've terrified innocent people. You ripped them from their homes. A necessary quarantine, Silas retorted, unfazed. They will be returned once the infection is purged. Some sacrifices must be made for the greater good. That's not your decision to make. The verbal sparring was over. Silas gestured, and Giratina, its eyes blazing, unleashed a will-o-wisp, a volley of ghostly purple flames that shot toward Palkia. Palkia, spatial rend. Ash commanded. Palkia swiped its claw, and the air itself tore apart. The blades of spatial energy met the ghostly flames, and the two attacks annihilated each other in a chaotic burst of energy that sent ripples through the strange dimension. What followed was a battle on a scale that defied comprehension. It was a clash of gods, a conflict of philosophies played out across a canvas of impossible physics. Palkia, the master of space and order, against Giratina, the lord of antimatter and chaos. Giratina used Shadow Sneak, dissolving into a patch of distorted shadow on one island and reappearing with explosive force right behind Palkia. But Ash was ready. Aura Sphere. Palkia didn't need to turn. A sphere of concentrated blue energy formed on its back and fired, striking Giratina square in the chest and sending it reeling. Impressive, Silas called out, his voice calm despite the divine fury being unleashed. But you're a guest in my home. He gestured again. Giratina dove beneath the floating island, its shadowy influence spreading through the rock. The very ground Palkia stood on began to shift and dissolve, the laws of physics that held it together becoming undone. Palkia, up! Ash yelled. Palkia took to the air just as the island crumbled into a shower of floating debris. The battle was a three-dimensional chess match fought at impossible speeds. Giratina was faster, more agile, using the chaotic nature of its home dimension to its advantage. It phased through solid objects, used its control over antimatter to create pockets of decay, and attacked from insane, unpredictable angles. But Ash and Palkia had an answer. Palkia was the master of geometry, the arbiter of distance and position. Guided by Ash's strategic mind, it countered Giratina's chaos with absolute, unyielding order. It warped space to shorten the distance for its own attacks or lengthen it to evade Giratina's. It created stable pockets of normal physics to trap Giratina in, forcing it into a direct confrontation. As the battle raged, Cynthia was working her own kind of miracle. Shielded by Latias, she had reached the terrified civilians. "I'm Cynthia," she said, her voice calm and reassuring despite the cosmic war raging overhead. "We're going to get you out of here." She was a beacon of sanity in a world gone mad, her presence alone enough to quell their panic. She looked up at the battle, and a chilling realization began to dawn on her. She had spent her life studying the myths of Sinnoh. She knew the stories of Giratina. It was a creature of defiance, of pride, of balance, the necessary shadow to Arceus's light. But this was different. Giratina's rage was too wild, its movements too erratic. There was a desperation to its attacks, a feral madness that went beyond simple territorial defense. "Ash," she projected, using Latias as a psychic relay. "Something's wrong with Giratina. Its energy signature, it's corrupted. It's not just fighting, it's feeding on the negative energy of this place, and something is feeding on it." Ash felt it too. A cold spot in his senses, emanating not from the hollows, but from Giratina itself. Silas wasn't controlling a renegade god. He was riding a rabid, dying beast. The hollow corruption had taken root in the Lord of the Distortion world itself. The realization changed everything. He wasn't just fighting Silas anymore. He had to save Giratina. "Palkia," Ash projected, a new plan forming in his mind. "We're not trying to win. We're performing an exorcism." He looked toward Silas, who was now beginning to look concerned, noticing his partner's increasingly frantic and uncontrolled movements. "Silas. Your partner is sick." The hollows have infected it. You have to stop. Lies. Silas yelled back, but there was a seed of doubt in his voice. He could feel Giratina's consciousness, a storm of pain and rage that was beginning to slip from his grasp. It's the power of the distortion world. It's pure. It's being poisoned. Ash countered. He knew he couldn't get through to him with words. He had to show him. Palkia, create a stable field. Right here. Palkia roared and slammed its hands together. A sphere of pearlescent light expanded outwards, a perfect reality bubble, where the laws of the physical world held true. The chaotic, swirling colors of the distortion world were held at bay outside its translucent walls. Giratina, caught within the bubble, shrieked as the stable physics warred with its chaotic nature. It was in this moment of weakness that Ash acted. Now, he yelled. From the safety of their pokeballs, two new forms materialized inside the bubble. One was a small, green, fairy-like creature with wide blue eyes. The other was a tiny, white, hedgehog-like Pokemon that immediately bloomed, a Gracidia flower opening on its back as it shifted to its sky for me. Celebi and Shaymin. He's not going to fight it with them, one of the rescue trainers whispered in awe. No, Cynthia said, a slow smile spreading across her face as she understood Ash's insane, brilliant plan. He's going to heal it to death. Silas watched, confused, as Celebi and Shaymin took to the air. They didn't attack. They began to glow, one with the green light of vibrant life and nature, the other with a shimmering aura that resonated with the flow of time itself. They unleashed their power, not as an attack, but as a wave of overwhelming, concentrated positivity. An aura of pure life, of gratitude, of the forward, linear march of time. To the hollow parasite latched onto Giratina's soul, it was the most potent poison imaginable. The parasite, a being of antimatter, decay, and negation, could not exist in such an environment. Giratina's body began to convulse. A shadowy, vaguely insectoid shape, a thing of pure blackness and negative energy, began to detach itself from Giratina's spiritual core, screeching a silent, psychic scream of agony. It was being burned alive by the sheer, unadulterated force of life. The battle had become a standoff. Ash, his face a mask of concentration, poured his own will into the bubble, reinforcing Palkia, Celebi, and Shaymin. Latias, carrying Cynthia and the others, moved to a safe distance, her own psychic energy forming a secondary shield. Silas stood frozen on his ledge, his face a canvas of horror. He was finally seeing the truth. The dark power he had embraced, the pure chaos he thought he commanded, was a lie. It was a disease. The partner he had bonded with, the god he thought he understood, was being eaten alive from the inside out, and he had been its willing accomplice. His quest for order had been co-opted to spread the ultimate chaos. The moment stretched, a silent war of concepts. Life versus nothingness. Time versus decay. Gratitude versus despair. During the struggle, the reality bubble buckled. A wave of dimensional energy threw everyone off balance. Latias was forced to dodge, and Cynthia was separated from the group, tumbling through the strange, gravity-less space toward a swirling vortex. Cynthia! Ash screamed, his concentration shattering. Forgetting the battle, forgetting Giratina, his every instinct screamed to get to her. He urged Palkia forward, a desperate, frantic dash through the chaotic space. He reached out, his hand outstretched, his face a mask of pure terror at the thought of losing her. Palkia, understanding, warped space in front of them. One moment she was falling, the next, she was right there. Ash grabbed her, pulling her onto Palkia's back in a fierce, desperate embrace that said more than any words ever could. All pretense, all unspoken feelings, were burned away in that one, raw moment of near loss. With Cynthia safe, Ash's focus snapped back to the battle. The parasite was almost free. Just a little more, he urged. With a final, agonizing psychic shriek, the hollow parasite was expelled. It was a creature of nightmare, a vaguely humanoid shape made of pure, featureless darkness and negative energy. Giratina, free of its influence, collapsed onto a floating rock, its form flickering, weakened but finally sane. Silas stared at his fallen partner, then at the creature of pure nothingness coalescing before them. His certainty was shattered, his entire philosophy a ruin. He looked at Ash, his eyes wide not with hate, but with the hollow shock of a man who has realized his entire life was a lie. The expelled parasite, however, was not finished. It stabilized, its form solidifying into that of a tall, unervingly slender knight, clad in armor made of solidified void. It held a long sword that seemed to cut the light from the air. A hollow knight. It turned its head, its featureless face fixing on Ash. A voice, cold, hollow, and ancient, spoke, not through the air, but inside all of their minds. It was the first time their enemy had given voice to its purpose. The arbiter, the anchor. The hollow knight stated, its voice the sound of a dying star. Must be, unmade. Chapter 6, The Sword of Damocles. The hollow knight was silence given form and purpose. It moved with a liquid grace that was utterly at odds with its rigid, armored appearance. The long sword it wielded wasn't metal, it was a blade of pure negation, and the air it passed through seemed to thin, to become less real. The voice that had echoed in their minds had been a declaration of war, and the knight was its first soldier. Without a word, it lunged. Not at Ash, its stated target, but at the weakest point in the room, the collapsed form of Giratina. No! Silas screamed, his paralysis breaking into a surge of protective instinct. He threw himself in front of his partner, a desperate, futile gesture. But Ash was already moving. Palkia, spatial rend. Giratina, shadow force, now. The command to Giratina was a gamble, a plea based on a hope that the renegade god would recognize a common enemy. The gamble paid off. Giratina, though weakened, let out a guttural roar of fury. Its body dissolved into a chaotic shadow and vanished, just as the knight's sword sliced through the space it had occupied. The blade didn't hit rock, it simply unmade it, leaving a clean, black line of nothingness hanging in the air. Simultaneously, Palkia's attack struck the knight from the side. The blade of warped space slammed into the creature's shoulder. For the first time, one of their attacks had a tangible effect. The knight's form flickered, its armor cracking like dark glass. But it didn't cry out. It didn't even flinch. It simply reformed itself, the cracks sealing as if they had never been. It was like fighting a living shadow. Giratina reappeared behind the knight, its shadow force attack erupting with a blast of violent, negative energy. The attack, which would have crippled any other Pokémon, was absorbed by the knight, its form seeming to darken and solidify. It was feeding on the very energy of the distortion world. It's too strong here. Cynthia yelled from Latias's back, her mind racing. This dimension is its food source. You can't win by fighting it on its own terms. Ash knew she was right. This wasn't a battle of attrition. This was a tactical retreat. Silas, get Giratina out of here. Ash shouted. To Palkia, he projected, open a gate. Get everyone back to the physical world. I'll hold it off. Silas, his face a mess of confusion and dawning horror, didn't argue. He recalled the exhausted Giratina into its pokeball, a gesture of a partner, not a master, and leaped onto Latias's back as the psychic Pokémon swooped by. Palkia roared, tearing another clean, pink rift in the chaotic sky of the distortion world. The familiar blue sky of Unova was a welcome, sane sight on the other side. Latias, carrying Cynthia, Silas, and the rescued civilians, shot through the portal without a second's hesitation. The Hollow Knight turned its full attention to Ash and Palkia, its empty face radiating a cold, implacable focus. It raised its sword. Palkia, let's go. Ash yelled. Palkia backed toward the portal, unleashing a final, massive aura sphere to give them cover. The blue orb of energy slammed into the night, engulfing it. For a moment, it was obscured. But as Palkia slipped through the closing rift, a black sword of pure nothingness sliced through the aura sphere, through the portal, and through the fabric of reality itself. Ash felt a searing, cold pain in his side. He looked down. The knight's attack had grazed him as the portal closed, slicing through his tunic and leaving a thin, black line on his skin. It didn't bleed. It didn't burn. The skin along the cut simply wasn't there. It was a tiny taste of the unmaking, a chilling promise of the knight's power. He gritted his teeth against the unnatural, soul-deep chill spreading from the wound. They were back in the skies over Driftvale, the gaping crater a stark reminder of the day's events. Silas stood on a nearby rooftop, staring at the poke ball in his hand, his world completely upended. He finally looked at Ash, his usual arrogance gone, replaced by a hollowed-out uncertainty. "More of them are coming," he said, his voice flat. "The rot in the distortion world, it's deep. They're not just breaking through. They're being born there." That night, it was just the first. With that, he vanished, a flicker of shadow his only goodbye. He was no longer an antagonist, but he was far from an ally. He was a man with a shattered faith, adrift in a war he had helped to start. Cynthia rushed to Ash's side. "You're hurt," she said, her eyes wide as she saw the strange, black wound. She reached for it, but Ash stopped her. "Don't touch it," he warned, his voice strained. "It's not a normal cut." He pressed his own hand over it, the mandate glowing faintly. The warmth of his own life energy fought against the encroaching cold of the void, slowly, painfully, knitting the wound shut from the inside out. It was like trying to fill a hole in his very soul. The world seemed to take a collective breath. The immediate crisis was over. But they had made contact with the enemy's officer class. The invasion had a face now, and that face was a merciless, silent knight. In his subterranean command center, a place of cold steel and colder logic, Commander Valerius watched the final, authenticated report from Mount Silver. He'd seen it a dozen times. The footage was undeniable. Ash Ketchum had stood before a rampaging god, offered no violence, and through some incomprehensible act of empathy, had healed a dying mountain and saved thousands of lives. His own, humane solution, the reality anchors, now sat in a warehouse, a monument to his own hubris. His worldview, built on the solid bedrock of human ingenuity and necessary force, had been shaken. But it had not been broken. It had been cracked, and into those cracks, new, more dangerous idea was taking root. He had believed Ash was a threat because his power was absolute. But what he saw at Mount Silver was something far more terrifying. Ash's power wasn't just absolute, it was righteous. People would not just fear a man like that. They would worship him. And a world that worshipped a single man, no matter how benevolent, was a world that had surrendered its own will, its own future. His logic twisted, reforging itself around this new axiom. Ash Ketchum was no longer just a threat to global security. He was a threat to the future of human sovereignty. A disease of dependency that had to be cured, no matter the cost. "Sir," his lead scientist, a severe woman named Dr. Eris, said, her voice quiet. "The analysis of the Spear Pillar event is complete. The energy signature of the Arbiter's mandate, it has a unique dimensional resonance. It's tied directly to the life force of every legendary Pokémon." Valerius turned from the screen, his eyes cold and clear. The confusion was gone, replaced by a chilling certainty. "Can you replicate that resonance?" Dar. Eris hesitated. "In theory, sir. We could create a targeted dimensional wave. But to what end? It would be like a key to a lock," Valerius finished for her. "A key that can turn both ways. If it can create a connection, it can also be used to sever one." He walked to a holographic schematic dominating the center of the room. It showed a sleek, intercontinental missile. He brought up a new module, a complex, spherical device covered in resonating forks. "Integrate it." Project Spear of Longinus is now active. Top priority. Dr. Eris looked horrified. Commander, a weapon like that, it wouldn't just sever a connection. It would target a legendary's unique life signature and erase it from the dimensional spectrum. It would be retroactive. It wouldn't just kill it, it would make it so it never existed. The collateral damage to the timeline, to the ecosystem, is an acceptable risk, Valerius stated, his voice flat and final. Compared to the certainty of a world on its knees before a single man. It is a terrible weapon. A last resort. But we must have it. We must have a sword to hang over the head of this self-proclaimed king. A few days later, he got his chance to use it. A secret faction within the Pokémon League Alliance, a group of Old Guard leaders terrified by the news of a Hollow Knight and Silas's defection, held a clandestine meeting with him. They had lost faith in Ash's soft methods. They saw only a chaotic war with no end in sight. Valerius, with his calm demeanor and promises of a swift, decisive solution, was a siren song they could not resist. They gave him what he wanted, a green light, and a location. The sea around the Whirl Islands was unnaturally calm, the surface like a sheet of polished blue glass. The famous whirlpools that gave the archipelago its name were gone, the powerful currents that created them mysteriously stilled. Ash stood on the shore of the largest island, the wind tugging at his hair. He'd come at the urgent, psychic behest of Lugia. The great guardian of the seas was in distress. Not from a hollow attack, but from a profound and deepening lethargy. The life energy of the ocean itself seemed to be thinning, fading. It was a subtle, slow-acting version of the decay, a creeping sickness that was putting the very soul of the sea to sleep. Lugia floated over the calm water, its massive form radiating a deep weariness. It wasn't in pain, but its inner light, the vibrant psychic energy that Ash could always feel, was dimmed. Cynthia was a few feet away, running diagnostics on a water sample. The microbiological life is dormant, she said, her brow furrowed in confusion. Phytoplankton, ancient bacteria, it's all still here, but its energy output is near zero. It's like the ocean is falling into a coma. Pikachu sat on a rock, nibbling on a berry, a small moment of peace in a world of endless crisis. He, too, felt the wrongness, a sluggishness in the air that made him feel sleepy. In this stolen moment of relative quiet, Ash and Cynthia finally had a chance to breathe. The weight of the world was still on their shoulders, but for a moment, it felt manageable. I'm scared, Ash admitted, his voice quiet, almost lost in the sound of the gentle waves. He was looking at Lugia, but he was talking to her. Every time we solve one problem, 3 more appear. The Knights, the Decay, Valerius, Silas. I don't know if I'm strong enough to stop it all. Cynthia came to stand beside him. She didn't offer platitudes or false reassurances. She simply stood with him, a silent, solid presence. I can't imagine a world without you in it, trying, she said, her voice soft but firm. It wasn't a grand confession of love. It was a simple statement of fact, a declaration of her faith in him. It was more than enough. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. Their future was a terrifying, unwritten page, but in that moment, they knew they would face it together. It was then that Cynthia's datapad, linked to a secure network maintained by Looker, began to flash with a frantic, high-priority alert. Ash. She said, her voice suddenly tight with alarm. It's a trap. Looker's sources, the Alliance betrayed us. They gave Aegis our location. The world exploded. A streak of white fire appeared in the sky, moving faster than any jet, faster than any Pokémon. It was a missile, and its target was the weary, floating form of Lugia. There was no time to think. No time to call another legendary. No time to plan. There was only instinct. Ho-Oh, sacred fire. Ash roared, the command ripped from his throat. A brilliant rainbow of light appeared in the sky, and the magnificent bird of the heavens materialized, unleashing a wall of mystical, purifying flame directly in the missile's path. Latios, Latias, bend the light, he commanded. The Aeon duo appeared, their bodies glowing as they tried to warp the space around Lugia, to create a psychic mirage. But the missile was too fast, its technology too advanced. It tore through the sacred fire, its guidance system impervious to the psychic distortions. It was going to hit. In the final microsecond, Ash made a choice. He let go of Cynthia's hand, shoved her behind him, and threw himself in front of Lugia. Pikachu leaped from the rock onto his shoulder, a tiny, defiant soldier placing himself between his partner and the apocalypse. Pika. Ash raised his right hand, the Arbiter's mandate flaring with a light so brilliant it outshone the sun. He braced himself, a lone man and his electric mouse against a weapon designed to erase a god from existence. The spear of Longinus struck. The impact was not an explosion of fire and shrapnel. It was a silent, devastating detonation of dimensional energy. A wave of pure, geometric unspace erupted from the point of impact. The very fabric of reality groaned, twisted, and shattered. But it did not break. The mandate on Ash's hand became a miniature black hole, a singularity of will. It did not block the dimensional wave. It absorbed it. The intricate silver lines on his hand turned a stark, raven black as they drank in the god-killing energy. The power, designed to erase a life signature, was instead channeled, redirected, and grounded through Ash's own unbreakable connection to the planet. The resulting feedback was immense. The entire island shuddered. The calm sea was blasted into a churning vortex. A shockwave of pure power erupted outwards, shattering every Aegis sensor and surveillance device for 1,000 miles. Ash was thrown back, his body slamming into Lugia with bone-jarring force, but he was alive. He hadn't just blocked a missile. He had tanked a god-killer. The world's media, alerted by the energy spike, captured the aftermath. The live feeds showed it all, the calm sea turned into a maelstrom, the shattered island, and Ash Ketchum, standing protectively before Lugia, his hand glowing with terrifying, world-altering power. He was no longer a political issue. He was a global fugitive, a man who had survived an assassination attempt by a weapon of mass destruction. On the bridge of the Spear of Reason, Valerius watched the live feed of the failed attack. His face was pale, his hands trembling slightly. His last resort, his ultimate solution, his sword of Damocles, had failed. He hadn't just failed to kill the king. He had proven to the entire world that the king was immortal. His quiet terror was not just for his failure. It was for what he had unleashed. What have we created? He whispered to the silent bridge. His question was answered by the world itself. The dimensional energy from the spear's impact, absorbed and redirected by Ash, had not vanished. It had torn a new, unstable rift in the sky above the Whirl Islands. It was a jagged, ugly wound, leaking the cold static of the void. From this rift, not one, but 3 shadows emerged. 3 more hollow knights, identical to the one from the distortion world, floated down from the tear in reality. They stood poised in the sky, their silent, empty gazes fixed on the world below. The subtle invasion, the creeping decay, the political maneuvering, it was all over. The invasion had begun. Chapter 7, The Unraveling Dawn. The world held its breath for precisely 12 seconds. For 12 seconds, the 3 new hollow knights hovered in the sky above the Whirl Islands, silent and motionless as statues carved from midnight. For 12 seconds, global news feeds broadcast their terrifying image, a triumvirate of nothingness poised against the blue sky. Then, in perfect, unnerving synchronicity, they moved. One shot west, a black streak against the sunset, heading for the heart of Kalos. Another shot east, a silent missile aimed at the sprawling metropolis of Castelia in Unova. The third descended, its target the glittering lights of Goldenrod City in Johto. The invasion was not a blitzkrieg of fire and explosions. It was a targeted, strategic assault on the very concept of civilization. Their arrival was heralded by a wave of reality decay that washed over the target cities. In Lumiose City, the vibrant lights of the Prism Tower flickered and died, the structure itself groaning as its steel frame seemed to age a century in a minute. In Castelia, entire skyscrapers shimmered, their edges becoming indistinct as if they were poorly rendered images. In Goldenrod, the beloved magnet train shuddered to a halt, its magnetic levitation failing as the physical laws that governed it began to fray. Panic, raw and absolute, erupted on a global scale. This wasn't a Pokémon battle. This was an existential threat, an enemy that could not be fought with flamethrowers and thunderbolts. The world's conventional forces, the proud armies and Pokémon leagues of each region, were useless. Their attacks passed through the nights with no effect, or worse, were simply unmade, the energy of a hyper beam dissolving into nothingness a foot from its target. The knights didn't even seem to notice. They moved with a slow, deliberate purpose, their mere presence enough to unravel the world around them. The Aegis Initiative, humanity's last, best hope, fared no better. Valerius, his composure shattered, ordered his forces to engage. Their advanced energy weapons, the pride of their technological arsenal, proved as effective as throwing stones. The knights ignored the attacks, their focus solely on their esoteric goal, their presence alone causing Aegis jets to fall from the sky as their flight system simply ceased to function. The world was burning, and Ash Ketchum, the one man who could stop it, was a fugitive. "We can't be everywhere at once," Cynthia said, her voice strained. She stood beside Ash, a fierce, protective stance, on the now barren peak of Mount Silver. After the attack, it was the one place she'd calculated they would be safe, its new, vibrant geothermal heart a natural defense against the encroaching decay. Splitting up is what they want. We need a command center. A place to coordinate. Ash stared at the tablet in her hand, which showed a dozen fragmented, chaotic news feeds. A Garchomp trying to fight a knight in Lumiose, its dragon claw passing through the creature's arm as if it were smoke. An Aegis tank in Castelia firing a shell that vanished mid-flight. A terrified Miltank in Goldenrod, its rollout attack stopping dead as the ground before it turned to gray, featureless dust. He felt a cold, hard knot of anger in his chest. The people who had betrayed him, the leaders who had feared him, were now watching their cities die, helpless. But the anger was a luxury he couldn't afford. It was a fire that would burn away the focus he desperately needed. He pushed it down, converting it into a core of cold, clear resolve. "You're right," he said, his voice steady. "We need a place outside of space and time. A place they can't touch." He closed his eyes, the mandate on his hand glowing with a brilliant, golden light. He reached out, not to a single legendary, but to the source. He called upon the key he had been given, the one that unlocked the door to the workshop of God. The world around them dissolved. The rocks, the sky, the thin mountain air, it all faded away, replaced by a sight no mortal other than Ash had ever been meant to see. They were standing on a floating, crystalline platform in a sea of stars. Nebulae of every color swirled in the infinite distance. The floor beneath them was a transparent map of the universe, with galaxies and star systems glittering like scattered diamonds. They were in the Hall of Origin. The sheer scale and majesty of it stole Cynthia's breath. As an archaeologist and a scholar of myth, this was her holy grail, the sanctum sanctorum of all existence. But there was no time for awe. A massive, celestial map of their own planet floated in the center of the hall, glowing with a soft light. On the map, 3 angry red blotches pulsed over Kalos, Unova, and Johto, the festering wounds of the knight's presence. "From here," Ash said, his voice echoing in the vast, silent hall, "I can be everywhere at once." He became a true commander, a king leading a war on a scale no human had ever imagined. He didn't issue verbal commands. He reached out with his will, a grand strategist deploying his divine forces. Cobalion. Terrakion. Virizion. The city of steel needs your swords. Protect the innocent. Harass the night. Do not engage it directly. Your purpose is to be a shield for the people. On the map, 3 points of light detached from a remote corner of Unova and shot toward Castelia City. The Swords of Justice had answered the call. Mesprit. Uxie. Azelf. Go to the City of Gold. Your psychic power can shield the minds of the people from the night's aura of despair. Reinforce their will to live. That is your weapon. 3 more light streaked from the Sinnoh Lakes, converging on Goldenrod. Xerneas, he projected, his call reaching into the deep forests of Kalos. Lumios is dying. It needs your life. A brilliant, multicolored point of light flared to life on the map, moving toward the blighted city. Pikachu stood on the edge of the celestial map, watching the points of light move, his small body tense. He was a general's aide, his senses an early warning system for his partner. He could feel the strain on Ash, the immense mental and spiritual effort it took to coordinate a global, multi-theological war. The defense was desperate, but it was working. The Swords of Justice, moving with blinding speed, became a blur of motion in Castelia, herding people to safety, their blades deflecting falling debris, their presence a symbol of hope that pushed back against the encroaching fear. The Lake Trio created a massive psychic dome over Goldenrod, a shimmering barrier that didn't block physical attacks, but filtered out the soul-crushing despair of the night, allowing the city's defenders to rally. In Lumios, Xerneas planted itself at the base of the Prism Tower, its great, antler-like horns glowing. A wave of pure life energy washed through the city, the dying lights flickering back on, the crumbling steel groaning as it was rejuvenated. They were holding the line. But it was a losing battle. The knights were implacable. They ignored the legendaries, their focus absolute. The reality decay, though slowed, continued to spread. They weren't just fighting a battle, they were trying to hold back the tide with their bare hands. On the bridge of the crippled Spear of Reason, hovering uselessly over the chaos of Castelia, Commander Valerius watched his world end. His screen showed his forces in full retreat. His superweapons were inert. His ideology was a pile of ash. He saw the Swords of Justice, creatures he had classified as threats, now acting as the city's only effective protectors. He saw footage from Lumios, where the mythical Xerneas was doing more to save the city than his entire fleet. He saw the truth, and it was a bitter, humiliating pill to swallow. Ash Ketchum was never the enemy. Ash Ketchum was the only one who had understood the stakes from the very beginning. His pride, his trauma, his cold, hard logic, it had all been wrong. And his mistake was costing the world everything. He made a decision. It was the hardest of his life. It meant admitting failure, surrendering his authority, and destroying the very foundation of his identity. But the survival of the human race depended on it. He turned to his communications officer. Get me a channel to the Arbiter. I don't care how you do it. Use psychic relays, tap into the legendary's energy signatures, bounce a signal off the moon. Just do it. Minutes later, a single, shaky voice crackled in the silent, star-filled expanse of the Hall of Origin. Arbiter? Can you read me? Cynthia looked at Ash, her expression a mixture of shock and suspicion. It's Valerius. Ash met her gaze, his own expression unreadable. He gave a slight nod. A holographic screen materialized in the air, showing Commander Valerius's pale, drawn face. He looked like a man who had aged 20 years in an hour. There was no arrogance left in his eyes, only the bleak clarity of absolute defeat. He didn't waste time on apologies or explanations. Pragmatism was the one part of his old self he had left. Arbiter, this is Commander Valerius, he said, his voice flat and formal, stripped of all its earlier condescension. My forces in Lumios, Castelia, and Goldenrod are being overrun. The target is a Knight-class entity in all 3 locations. Our weapons are ineffective. He took a breath, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. I'm sending you my command codes and all Aegis tactical data, including our analysis of the Knight's decay patterns and our remaining satellite surveillance network. Unconditionally. He looked Ash directly in the eye, a commander surrendering his sword. Tell me what to do. The simple, direct transfer of command, the complete and total submission, spoke more than 1,000 apologies. It was the ultimate admission that his way had failed, and Ash's was the only hope left. At that same moment, a flicker of shadow coalesced at the edge of the Hall of Origin. Silas appeared, leaning heavily on a partially healed Giratina. He looked ragged, haunted, but his eyes held a new, hard-won purpose. The seams between worlds are thinning, he announced, his voice rough. The Knight's presence in the physical world is pulling the distortion world closer. More rifts will open. I and Giratina can guard those seams. We can stop the hollows from pouring through, buy you time to deal with the Knights. An impossible, desperate alliance was born in the heart of creation. A king without a country, a disgraced commander, and a fallen prophet, united by the common goal of preventing extinction. Cynthia became the linchpin, the grand strategist who held it all together. She took Valerius's data, Silas's intel on the dimensional weak points, and Ash's own sensory information and began to weave them into a coherent, global battle plan. Aegis forces, pull back, she commanded, her voice relayed through their network, crisp and authoritative. Your new role is search and rescue. Create evacuation corridors under the protection of the legendaries. Get the civilians out. Silas, focus on the areas around the cities. The Knight's decay fields are weakest at the perimeter, that's where new rifts are most likely to form. She was a maestro conducting a symphony of chaos, turning their three disparate, broken forces into a single, cohesive army. Amidst the frantic energy of coordinating a world-saving war, she found a moment to stand beside Ash. He was staring at the celestial map, the weight of 1 billion lives visible in the tense set of his shoulders. She didn't touch him. She just stood with him, a shared presence in the eye of the storm. When this is over, he started, his voice barely a whisper. Don't, she interrupted softly, her gaze fixed on the swirling lights of the map. She knew he was about to make a promise that the universe might not let him keep. The hope for a future was a fragile, precious thing, too fragile to be spoken aloud. Just, let's get to, over. The unspoken promise, the shared dream of a quiet dawn, hung between them, more powerful and intimate than any vow. It was the future they were fighting for. Cynthia turned back to the data feed streaming in from Valerius's network. She was cross-referencing the Knight's movements, the spread of their decay fields, the energy readings from the new rifts. She was looking for a pattern, a weakness, a strategy. And then she saw it. It was a horrifying, soul-crushing revelation. The lines of decay weren't random. The locations of the Knights weren't arbitrary. It was all connected, lines of decaying reality forming a vast, planetary-scale geometric pattern. A ritual circle. Her blood ran cold. Ash, she said, her voice a choked whisper. They're not trying to conquer the world. They're not trying to destroy us. She brought up the global map, highlighting the lines of decay. They all converged on a single point. A point of immense mythological and dimensional significance. A place where the world had been born, and where it had almost ended before. They're anchors, she said, the terrifying truth falling from her lips. They're performing a ritual. They're preparing to pull Nihilus's true form, the great unraveling itself, into our reality. The map zoomed in on the focal point of the ritual, the epicenter of the entire invasion. The sacred peak of Mount Coronet. Spear Pillar. Chapter 8, The Shape of a Memory. The ascent of Mount Coronet was a climb into the heart of a nightmare. The familiar snow-covered slopes were gone, replaced by a landscape of gray, featureless terrain that crumbled to dust underfoot. The very air was thin and dead, robbed of scent and sound. A vast army of hollows, a silent legion of corrupted Pokémon, swarmed the mountainside, their vacant eyes fixed on the peak. They didn't attack with fury, but with a creeping, inexorable purpose, their presence alone accelerating the decay. Against this tide of nothingness, the world's last, desperate alliance made its stand. Commander Valerius, his face grim and set, stood on a hastily erected command platform, his Aegis uniform now a symbol of redemption, not hubris. All units, concentrate fire on the larger hollows. Create a corridor for the League trainers. Let them get through. His forces, no longer trying to fight the unkillable, had become a shield, their energy weapons used to hurt and slow the hollow tide. Lance, the Dragon Master, soared overhead on his Dragonite, coordinating the Pokémon League forces. Elite Four, on me. We punch a hole through their center. Champions, guard the flanks. It was a battle unlike any they had ever fought, a chaotic, brutal slog against an enemy that felt no pain and had no fear. They were fighting not for victory, but for time. At the entrance to the Distortion World, a chaotic rift near the mountain's base, Silas stood as a lone warden. His coat was torn, his face etched with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with a new, focused fire. Giratina, a phantom of shadow and rage, fought beside him, its power no longer a tool for imposing order, but a chaotic barrier protecting it. It held the second front, a solitary king guarding a broken gate, its roars a defiant cry against the encroaching silence. But the real battle was at the summit. At Spear Pillar, reality had completely broken down. The sky was a shattered mosaic of black void and swirling, cosmic color. The ancient stones of the pillar itself groaned, threatening to dissolve. In the center of it all, hanging in the air where Arceus had once appeared, was a perfect sphere of absolute blackness. It was not a hole. It was a presence. A sphere of pure, unadulterated nothingness, the true, quiescent form of Nihilus, the great unraveling. The three Hollow Knights stood before it, their swords pointed inward, their energy a focused beam that was slowly, inexorably pulling the sphere into the physical world. They were guarded by Dialga and Palkia, their bodies now covered in the gray, corrosive marks of hollow corruption, their eyes vacant. The two gods of time and space had fallen, their minds enslaved, their immense power now used to stabilize the rift and protect their new master. Into this apocalyptic scene, Ash and Cynthia arrived. They rode not on Latios, but on the back of the original one itself. Arceus had manifested, a silent, grim figure of golden light, its very presence a defiance against the void it had once displaced. Cynthia's gaze took in the scene, the corrupted gods, the silent sphere, the encroaching end of all things. Her hand tightened on Ash's arm. Ash met her eyes, a silent conversation passing between them. A promise. A farewell. A final, shared moment of resolve. Then he looked at the corrupted forms of Dialga and Palkia, his heart aching. They were his first constituents, the first he had calmed. Now they were puppets. He slid off Arceus's back, landing softly on the crumbling stone. Cynthia, stay with Arceus, he said, his voice quiet but absolute. You're my anchor. Don't let me go. She nodded, her face pale but her eyes unwavering. I won't. Ash walked forward, alone, toward the corrupted gods and the silent sphere. Pikachu was a small, determined ball of yellow on his shoulder, his cheeks crackling with a defiant light. Dialga. Palkia. Ash called out, his voice ringing with the authority of the mandate. I'm here. Remember. Remember who you are. The two gods turned their vacant eyes toward him. There was no recognition. Under Nihilus's control, they raised their heads, preparing to unleash a combined blast of temporal and spatial energy that would erase him from existence. Ash didn't flinch. He didn't call on another legendary. He raised his hand, the silver tracing of the mandate glowing with a fierce, golden light. He closed his eyes and reached out, not to attack, but to connect. He plunged his will into their corrupted minds, a beacon of light in a sea of darkness. He didn't fight the corruption. He bypassed it. He pushed past the despair, the emptiness, the puppet strings of the void, and searched for the spark of who they were. He found it, faint and flickering, a tiny ember of their true selves buried deep within. And he poured his memories into them. Not his memories. Theirs. He showed Palkia the feeling of a universe perfectly folded, of a new star finding its correct place in the cosmos. He showed Dialga the satisfaction of a timeline flowing true, the first tick of the first second of creation. He reminded them of their purpose, of their pride, of their very being. The energy building in their mouths faltered. A flicker of their true, red-eyed color returned. They were fighting back. From behind them, the silent, black sphere pulsed. A wave of pure, concentrated void washed over them, and the spark of their true selves was snuffed out. Their eyes went blank again. They were lost. But it had been enough. The distraction had given him the opening he needed. Arceus, now! Ash yelled. Arceus unleashed a single, pure beam of golden light. It was not an attack. It was a key. The beam struck the rift, not to close it, but to stabilize it, to hold it open just long enough. Ash took a deep breath, gave Cynthia one last look, and then he and Pikachu ran forward, past the corrupted gods, and leaped directly into the black sphere. He was floating in a perfect, silent, endless nothing. There was no up or down, no light or dark. It was the absence of all things. The black sphere was not a place, it was a state of being. Or, rather, non-being. Before him, the consciousness of Nihilus coalesced. It had no form, no face. It communicated not with words, but by projecting pure, unfiltered truth directly into Ash's mind. This was the final battle. Not of power, but of philosophy. You see, Nihilus projected, its voice, the calm, rational tone of a philosopher. The flaw in creation. The fundamental error, Ash was bombarded with a torrent of images, a billion moments of suffering from across the entire history of the universe. A mother cub one weeping over the skull of its parent. A world dying in the fire of a supernova. An old man taking his last, lonely breath. Every moment of pain, every act of cruelty, every second of fear and loss and despair. Existence is a cacophony of pain, Nihilus argued. Life is a brief, chaotic flicker between two eternities of silence. Its primary byproduct is suffering. To exist is to hurt. My purpose is not evil. It is mercy. I offer an end to pain. I offer the peace and perfection of the silence from which all things came. Why do you fight for this beautiful, agonizing mistake? It was an unassailable argument. The sheer weight of all the universe's pain was crushing, absolute. Any other mind would have shattered, convinced by the terrible, irrefutable truth of it. But Ash Ketchum's mind was not like any other. His strength had never been logic. It was heart. Pikachu, on his shoulder, nuzzled his cheek, a tiny, warm spark of defiance in the infinite cold. Pikachu. A simple statement, I am with you. Ash smiled, a real, genuine smile. And he began his rebuttal. He didn't argue with words. He answered Nihilus's montage of pain with one of his own. He reached out with the mandate, not to command gods, but to do what he had always done best, to share a feeling. He projected a memory, a single, perfect moment. The feeling of a newly hatched Togepi, warm and fragile in his hands, looking up at him with pure, unblemished trust. This Ash projected back, the feeling a stark contrast to the cold logic of the void. This is also real. Nihilus showed him a vision of a brutal Pokemon battle, of a defeated, weeping trainer. Ash countered with the memory of the fierce, electric joy of winning his first gym badge. The pride. The shared triumph with Pikachu. The feeling of having earned something. This is real, too. Nihilus showed him the loneliness of a solitary legendary, the crushing weight of an immortal existence. Ash countered with the memory of sitting around a campfire with Brock and Misty, laughing so hard that lukewarm soup came out of his nose. The easy warmth of friendship. The simple, uncomplicated joy of a shared moment. And this, he countered every vision of pain, every logical argument for oblivion, with an illogical, emotional, stubbornly real memory of his own. The taste of one of his mother's home-cooked meals. The challenging smirk of his rival, Gary, that spurred him to be better. The quiet, solid support of Cynthia's hand in his. The fierce, unwavering loyalty of Pikachu, who had been with him through everything. He used the Arbiter's mandate to become a conduit, a lens. He channeled the collective, unspoken will to live of every being in the universe. The joy of a Bidoof building its first dam. The fierce love of a mother Kangaskhan for her child. The simple pleasure of a Snorlax waking up from a good nap. He projected the small, messy, chaotic, beautiful, imperfect moments that made up the grand, glorious argument for life. It hurts, Ash conceded, his thoughts a wave of defiant warmth. You're right. It hurts. It's messy, and it's unfair, and it's full of pain. But it's also full of this. All of this. And it's worth it. The pain is the price we pay for the joy. And I would pay it 1,000,000 times over. We would pay it. Because we are here. His final projection was a psychic roar, the combined will of every living thing, a defiant scream of existence against the silence. The pure, overwhelming force of it, the sheer emotional truth of a billion lives that chose, every day, to keep living, to keep trying, to keep hoping. It did not destroy Nihilus. It filled it. The perfect, silent void was filled with color, with sound, with feeling. For the first time in its eternal existence, the echo of what was not learned what it was to be. The first pinprick of golden light appeared in the endless black, a single memory of joy. Then another, and another, until the void was a swirling cosmos of memories, a universe of feeling. Nihilus was not defeated. It was, convinced. Its purpose, born from an eternity of silent loneliness, was undone by a single moment of shared warmth. The black sphere did not explode. It simply receded, fading not in defeat, but in understanding. It pulled back from the physical world, its ritual undone, taking the corrupted essence of the hollows with it. Ash found himself standing back on the stones of Spear Pillar. The sky was no longer shattered. A gentle, pre-dawn light was beginning to touch the horizon. The three hollow knights wavered, their forms dissolving into grey dust. Dialga and Palkia collapsed, the last of the hollow corruption fading from their bodies, their true selves returning, exhausted but free. The war was over. He swayed on his feet, the psychic and emotional exhaustion hitting him like a physical blow. Cynthia was there, her arms wrapping around him, holding him up. You came back, she whispered into his chest, her voice thick with unshed tears. Always, he murmured, burying his face in her hair, breathing in the real, tangible scent of her, a grounding anchor in a world he had just pulled back from the brink. Below, the battle had ceased. The hollow army had dissolved into dust. Valerius, Lance, Silas, they all stood, looking up at the quieted peak, at the rising sun, at the miracle they had only been able to witness. Months later. The world was healing. The scars on the cities and the land remained, but they were monuments now, reminders of the war they had won. A reformed Aegis, under Commander Valerius's leadership, was now a global relief and reconstruction force, working alongside Pokémon to rebuild. Their technology, once designed for control, was now used for healing. Silas, with a humbled, quiet respect, had accepted his role as the willing warden of the distortion world, his quest for order finding its true purpose in maintaining the delicate balance between worlds. Ash was at Professor Oak's lab in Pallet Town. The afternoon sun was warm, the air filled with the familiar sounds of chattering Pidgey and the scent of his mother's garden. He sat on the grass, watching a group of young Pokémon play. The Arbiter's mandate on his hand was no longer a stark symbol of power. It had faded to a faint, silvery tracery, like a birthmark, a part of him. The connection was still there, a quiet hum in the back of his soul, a responsibility he would carry forever. But it was no longer a crown of thorns. It was just, him. He heard footsteps and looked up. Cynthia was walking toward him, not in her champion's coat or a lab coat, but in simple traveling clothes. She was smiling, a real, carefree smile that reached her eyes. She stopped in front of him and held out her hand. In her palm was not a data pad or an ancient artifact, but 2 passports and 2 plane tickets. "I was thinking of taking a vacation," she said, her voice light, playful. "A long one. I was thinking maybe Gaylor. I hear the curry is good." She tilted her head, her smile widening. "But I don't want to go alone." Ash looked at the tickets, then at her, at the promise of a quiet, normal adventure in her eyes. The first truly carefree grin he'd had in a long time spread across his face. Pikachu, sensing the shift, leaped from the grass onto his customary perch on Ash's shoulder, his own small face alight with excitement. Ash took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers, the faint lines of the mandate brushing against her skin. "I think," he said, "I'd like that a lot." The adventure wasn't over. The adventure would never be over. But for the first time in a long time, it was a journey he would not have to make alone. It was theirs, an unwritten page, waiting for the dawn. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.